The lion's roar stopping off in King's Landing wasn't strange and was timely. Richard glad to see the captain switching his journey with one of the other ships and taking him directly to the west. It cut the traveling time down by almost a moon, and so it was a little over 3 weeks after Viserys' execution that he arrived in Lannisport. He rode straight from the city to Casterly Rock, didn't even bother to send word ahead that he'd arrived, as he knew his king would wish to speak to him immediately. He was proved right, and was shown through the vaults and out onto the beach. Jorah leading him to where Jay was sparring in the sand with Arthur, both of them moving quicker than he thought possible. Standing there with Jorah, he watched and waited until they were done, and saw Jay look to him and smile before walking over to him, Arthur following behind. "Richard, it's good to see you," Jay said. "You too, my king. I came as quickly as I could." "It's much appreciated, Richard. Have you eaten?" Jay asked. "No." "Come, let's eat. We've a lot to talk about." They walked back up the beach and into the vaults, and Richard was surprised when they took the lift to the family wing. Inside it was empty, and they sat down and had food brought to them. There wasn't much said as they ate, Jay asking him how he was and letting him know that Wyman and his brother were here, something which he'd already known, but even had he not, it would have been proved true a few moments later anyway. "Lord Wyman," Jay said as the Lord of White Harbor walked in and took a seat. "John, Richard," Wyman said as he began to eat his own meal. Wyman too didn't speak much, simply talking about how he'd expected Jay to ride with the others that morning, Jay saying he'd been expecting Richard and wished to get straight to work. That surprised Richard some, though he had sent word he was on the lion's roar. He had not expected them to know when he would be arriving. Once he'd finished, Jay said his goodbyes to Wyman for now, and Richard followed him as he took the lift back down to the vaults. "How did you know I'd arrived today, John?" he asked, worried he'd been compromised. "I've been looking for you along the route, Richard, using birds to find you. Once I did, I knew when the lion's roar would arrive, and so I waited for you." Jay said, "You can do that." "You can do that?" He asked, surprised, not by the warging, but that he could stay in something long enough to find him. "You'd be surprised what I can do, Richard," Jay said, closing his eyes. "Right now, Ghost is running with his brother ahead of all the others. Loras and Robb have just been beaten in a race by Joy, and Cregan has been teasing them over it, making Willa and Winifred laugh," Jay said. "It's that easy for you?" Richard asked. "With Ghost, or with any animal I've already warged into, it's almost instant. With others, it takes a little longer to make the connection, and the further I need to go, the more I have to concentrate," Jay said. "You don't need me. You could warg into almost any castle or keep your wish to," he said, only half japing. "And I'd still find out less than you do, Richard. I can warg into multiple things, but I can't be everywhere. Even with this and the glass candles, it's not enough, though I do have something that may help you in your work," Jay said as they stepped from the lift. He followed him to his room and was led inside, just him and Jay with Arthur waiting outside along with Jorah. Once in the room, Jay walked over to a chest in the corner and came back with a glass candle wrapped in cloth and handed it to him. "Once a week, Richard. We set aside a time once a week, and through that I can speak to you," Jay said, and Richard looked at him as if he was crazy. "Speak?" I've been more motivated lately. You know why," Jay said, and he didn't need to say more. "I spend my nights reading, trying things, and I figured it out. I've come to understand more about the cooldown and how it works. Well, almost how it works. There's a lot more there I've not gotten to yet. I know there is," Jay said. "But you can actually speak to me?" he asked again, trying to be certain. "If you wish to see it work, Richard, then you'll need to stay a few days," Jay said. "I had intended to," Richard said, looking at the glass candle and trying to figure out just how much of a boon this would prove if true, and he believed, or was starting to, that it was. "Before you leave, we'll arrange a time. Once a week I will light it, and we can talk. Anything you need to tell me about, you can." "Why not more than once a week, Jay?" he asked. "Sometimes I'm going to wish to use them to see things. Once I do, I lose the chance to use them for a few days. After we speak, I lose another few. I've figured it out. I can do both, only at the start and end of a week. It's the shortest time I can get it to, for now. For now? He asked. As I said, there is a lot more that can be done with them. I'm still only scratching the surface. Jay said with a smirk. Viserys, he said then a moment later. It was impossible, my king. I looked, Barristan looked. Had we more time? I know, I saw, Jay said, and Rich's head spun towards him. You saw. I wished to go, to ride on Rhaenix and burn the fat stag in the Red Keep to the ground, to force them to release my uncle. Rhaenix wouldn't take me, and so I looked and saw. You weren't the only one who had run out of time, Richard, Jay said, and Richard could see the hurt was still there. Viserys was my uncle. I care not how he was. He was my blood. Richard, my family. I'm not that blessed with so many of them that I could lose anymore, he said. Daenerys? You wish me to find her? He asked, and Jay shook his head. No, Richard. I've made arrangements for my aunt. Your job is much more pressing. He listened as Jay told him that it was time to make more direct moves, that Robert holding this tourney to celebrate his killing of Viserys was a step too far. The time was almost upon them to remove the stags from where they didn't belong. He asked him to speak to the loyalists, the true supporters of his family. They needed to be brought into the fold and told the truth, the full truth. You aren't afraid of being found out? He asked. It's only a matter of time, Richard. I'll be found out, and when I am, it's far better that it's on my terms than anyone else's. The tourney? I'll go. I have work. I need to take care of a message I need to send to all who are watching, and something that will help you in your work. Speak only to the most leal of houses during the tourney. Richard, only those who are already with us. The rest, once it's over with. I will, my king. Richard the Magister, he dies, Jay said. He dies, Richard replied. Dorne, 296-297 AC. Tyrion. His excitement at traveling to Dorne had been tempered somewhat by the journey itself, even though the Lion's Tooth was as comfortable as all the Pinnacle ships were, and as fast. To Tyrion, this journey had seemed to be the longest he'd ever been on. He knew, of course, that it was not. He'd traveled to King's Landing passing Dorne on the way before, and yet it felt it all the same. As he sat drinking with Bronn one night, they discussed it or more, he did, and Bronn just made smart-ass comments, though he found he enjoyed them all the same. The man continually bringing up the fact that since they'd been gone a year already, something that Tyrion couldn't seem to grasp was a jape for some time. That was why the journey felt so damn long. We've been gone a week, he said, shaking his head. A year, Bronn said, and Tyrion glared at him. We left a week ago, he said, before drinking some more. Aye, we did. And what year was it when we left? Bronn smirked. 296, he said. Well, it's 297 now. See, we've been gone a year. Bronn said as he cut a piece of cheese with his knife and ate it, washing it down with a mouthful of ale while grinning at him. That's not how it works, he said before hiccuping. It is today, Bronn said, laughing. He woke up the next morning with his head thumping. He'd not got fall down drunk in years. A couple of times only since Jaime had returned, he reckoned, and he paid for it over the course of the day. Bronn taking great delight in the fact that every little sound, every little noise or sudden movement made Tyrion cringe. You need more of what we had last night, Bronn said as he bit into an apple, Tyrion throwing up over the side of the ship, amusing him greatly. Never again, he said when he felt his stomach settle a little. I had a silver stag for every time I've said that. Do you know what I'd be? Bronn said with a chuckle. A very rich man, he laughed back. No, a damn poor one. Only a fool says never, Bronn said as he picked up his own mug and handed it to him. Drink. You know it'll settle your stomach. Just have the one if it makes you feel better. He did, and ended up having two. Though Bronn's grin soon went from his face when he realized that would be all he would be having for the foreseeable future. He asked the captain where they were and when they'd be arriving, happy to find out they were sailing past the salt shore and would be passing Lemonwood on the morrow and then be in Sunspear by that night. The captain's word proved true, and they arrived just before nightfall the next night, Tyrion both happy and slightly upset to see that while an escort was sent and Prince Oberyn stood ready to greet him, Arianne was not with him. Still, he was glad to see the prince again and was warmly greeted by Oberyn, the smile on his face and the sound of his voice as welcoming as ever. "The Lion of Lannister," Oberyn said, grinning. "The Viper of Dorne," he said back, his own smile just as big. "It's good to see you again, my friend. Come as much as I like the docks, this is not where you wish to be," Oberyn said. "No, it's not." Oberyn climbed into the carriage with him, and Bronn rode the prince's horse back. And as soon as the carriage began to move, Oberyn began to speak. "My niece sends her apologies, Tyrion. We had a visitor today before we knew you were arriving, and while relations have improved with House Yarnwood, if Arianne had left to greet you when she had not done the same with them, it would have been taken as an insult." "I understand. Arianne, she is well?" he asked slightly nervously. "Eager to greet you in person, my friend," Oberyn said with a smile. "And you, Oberyn, you and Ilaria, all is well, the children?" "They are, and I look forward to introducing you to my youngest. How fares things with our nephew?" "Good. He and Rhaenys took to the sky. Oberyn, he traveled to Dorne among other places," he said. And Oberyn stared at him. "He was here?" Oberyn asked. "He visited the tower, even found more dragon eggs if you believe it, but you understand why he didn't come here, don't you?" he asked. "I understand. I'd have liked to see him, though," Oberyn said softly. "And you will again soon, no doubt. He's not the only who's flown, Oberyn," he said. And Oberyn stared at him before laughing. "A giant shadow indeed," Oberyn said, and Tyrion for a moment didn't realize what he was saying before he remembered speaking to him of meeting Rhaenys the first time. He felt his nerves rise once again when he reached the old palace, and as he followed behind Oberyn into the hall, he found them setting up for the night's feast. Oberyn led him to his rooms, and had one of the men lead Bronn and his guards to theirs before he turned to him and winked as he walked away. Opening the door, he walked in and moved towards the bed, the darkness in the room only illuminated by the light of the moon outside. "My lion," he heard from behind him, and turned to see Arianne standing there, the slip she wore soon falling to the floor, and he felt his heart soar. "My princess," he said as he moved towards her. It was quick and frenzied, and not how he preferred, but they were both like two people who'd been denied water for moons. Two people who'd been forbidden food and had to watch as others dined on the best of dishes. Their hunger and thirst was of a much different sort, though, and even despite the quickness of their coupling, it was sated for now. "I'll speak to you later, when we do this properly," Arianne said, smiling as she kissed him and moved to put her slip back on. "Can't we just skip the feast and move right on to the dessert?" she said, almost whining, and she laughed as she moved forward and kissed him again. "My hungry lion," she whispered as she bit his ear gently. He watched her leave through the door, which led out onto the balcony, and once she was gone, he lay back down. What her father would think of his offer, he didn't know, and he wondered if, as Jon and Jaime suggested, it would take him knowing the full truth of him, or would it be as his aunt suggested, who he was being enough for any man to be proud to call him a good son. Whatever it took, though, he would make Arianne his wife. She had asked him to come and fight for her, and fight for her he would, with a dragon if necessary. Essos 297 AC, The Shy Maid. John Connington. For the first few days he had felt he had failed completely, even more so than he had at the Battle of the Bells, this easily outstripping that as the biggest single failure of his life. He had allowed his king to decide things that he should not, that he was not ready to, and had gone against his own judgment in doing so. Haldon had warned him, and Jon had taken Aegon's side, and he was now responsible just as much as Aegon himself was. Yet it wasn't his king he blamed, nor himself. Instead, his true anger and true rage was directed at Daenerys Targaryen. She had known, somehow she had known what he had planned and had arranged this. There could be no other explanation. Jon didn't understand how the bond with dragons worked, but that she was with the Red Priest, and that she somehow had Shiera Seastar with her, proved what had happened here. This was the blackest of magics, the darkest of them, and it had perhaps cost Jon more than even Robert Baratheon had taken from him. "Well?" he asked as Haldon walked from the room, Jon sitting at the table drinking heavily. "I've done what I can," he rests, "and until or if he wakes we'll know no more." It was the same answer he'd given him for over a moon. Aegon rested and had not woken and maybe would not. He swallowed his drink and walked into the cabin, his king laying on the bed covered in bandages. One side of his face was completely covered up, his arm and side bandaged heavily, and yet he breathed still, his king showing the strength within him and surviving where a lesser man would have fallen. "I'm sorry, my prince, forgive me," he said, crying as he lay in his bed that night, his nightly prayers and cries for Rhaegar to absolve him both going unanswered. Lemore, too, had taken Aegon's injuries badly, the set praying much more frequently and reverently than before. She would stand over Aegon's bed and sing to him. She washed him and cleaned his sheets, fed him, and apart from Haldon, it was she who spent the most time with him, Jon needing to be almost drunk before he could face looking at the evidence of his failure. The first time he woke up should have been a joyous occasion, but the screams of pain that came from Aegon's mouth tore Jon up inside. It got so bad that Haldon needed to give him a draft to put him back to sleep, but just that he was able to wake alone gave him hope. Over the next few weeks, Aegon woke more and more, and Jon's drinking became a problem, so much so that both Lemore and Duck lost their tempers with him. "Who are you serving by drinking Jon, not Aegon? He needs you, and you're in no state to help him, to guide him and see him through this," Lemore said angrily. "She's right, Jon. You, as you are now, may as well not be here. He needs you more than any of us. He needs you." "Leave me alone. I failed him," Jon shouted. "No, you did not, but you are failing him now," Lemore said, walking away. "Help him, Jon. Help him relieve, because as you are now, you're useless to us," Duck said as he too walked away. It took him almost a week to dry out, to stop the shivers and shakes which came from not drinking. During that time, Aegon was awake more than not. The pain, Haldon told him, would take time to go away, some of it more in Aegon's mind than from the actual burns themselves. When he sobered up, he began to sit with Aegon more and more, to speak to him, and to try his best to make him feel better. "Why did he turn on me? I'm a dragon, Jon. The last true dragon. Why did he turn on me?" Aegon said, struggling to speak. "Magics, Aegon. Darkest. Magics. I do not know where your aunt learned them, whether it was the Red Priests or from Shiera herself." "How could that be Jon, Shiera? Surely she's not her, a mummer of some sort," Aegon said before he began to cough, Jon quickly grabbing the mug of water and helping him drink, though most of it came spluttering out through the bandage. "I don't understand it, but those eyes. Aegon, no one else has those eyes. Those along with the rest of her features. That woman is Shiera Seastar, I'm sure of it," Jon said, and Aegon nodded. "Can we beat their magic, Jon? Break their spell?" Aegon asked. "We will, my king, we will," he said as Aegon lay back down on the bed. When the bandages came off, the full extent of Aegon's injuries were revealed, and even Septa Lemore couldn't bear to look at him. The right side of his face had been burned horrifically, his eye completely scarred over, his ear gone, and his cheek was an open wound. His neck and shoulder were completely burned, making him barely able to turn that way, and his arm was a withered mass of flesh, Haldon telling him that he'd never use it again, that it was his weaker side wasn't much of a boon, but it was all they got, that, and that the burns stopped at Aegon's waist. Jon tried to comfort him as much as he could when Aegon asked for the looking glass, tried to convince him not to look, and tried to hold him when he sobbed afterward. The revelation of just how bad his injuries were, though, almost broke him. Aegon needing time to himself, and Jon, Lemore, Haldon, and Duck, none of them being able to offer any comfort. We need to make something for him, Jon, to cover that side of his face. We have to have outfits made to cover as much of him up as possible. Lamora said, He is our king. I'll not see him covered up, he said angrily. He must be Jon. We know him, and he looks a monster to us, Duck said, and Jon glared at him. I love that boy Jon like he was mine own son, and I find it difficult to look at him. How will strangers react? Those we seek to bring to our side. How would you if you didn't know it was Aegon? Lamora asked. He knew what they spoke was the truth, and yet he found he wished to disagree in the end, though it was Aegon himself who decided. After a few days of dealing with it as best he could, Aegon called him to his room and spoke the same words that Lamora and the others did. Jon telling Yandri to take the shy maid to Norvos, and then sending the letter to Illyrio to finally tell him what had happened. One thing which he noticed quickly on the journey was Aegon seemed far more focused on his training, even beating Duck before they got there, and disarming him also. He hated that it had taken what had happened to fuel Aegon's rage and give him a focus, and that it was no longer the fat stag and the lions he sought to end. Instead, it was his aunt and Shiera, Sandor Clegane, and eventually the Red Priests. And Jon tried not to shudder when he spoke. We should be looking west, Aegon, he said as they stood on the deck. We will, once my aunt has been dealt with. I'll look west before then, though I seek to make them all pay. Jon, all of them, Daenerys, Shiera, Sandor, and the Red Priests. We'll make them pay my king, he said. I'm going to burn them, Jon. I'm going to burn them all, Aegon said as he walked away. Casterly Rock 297 AC. Rob. He soon found that like Jon, he loved being at the Rock. It was so different than the North, both in the warmth of the days and the way they did things. White Harbor compared to Winterfell had opened his eyes. Bravos and Pentos, too, had shown him the world was a much larger, stranger place than he had thought. But it had also shown him the benefits of the world being like that, of trade and bringing in things that each place didn't have enough of. Ice in the west was a luxury, the east too, and yet in the north it was everywhere. Here, fruits, wheat, and grain, things which were in short supply in the north, were just as plentiful. He'd learned from Wyman, and Jon had spoken of it too since he came here, that one of the keys was to see the gap in the market, see something you had that they did not, and see if there was a way to exploit it. Jon had, with the West and the North together, managed to find some big gaps, and it, along with the building of the ships, had led to Wyman and the North itself becoming far more wealthy. Yet compared to the Lannisters, they were nowhere. The sheer scope of the Lannister gold mining operation dwarfed almost all the North trade. When Cregan told him of Castamere and Jon took him to one of the Lannister mines, he began to wonder, did the North have gold or silver or anything they could exploit? How do you find the gold, Jon? He asked as they walked the mine once more. I don't. Jon japed, and Robb was glad to see his brother happy. He'd not been for some days. Aye, of course you don't, you lazy sod, he said, smirking back as Grey Wind and Ghost came back from one of the tunnels they went down. Lord Jaime has men employed by him. Surveyors and men who know what to look for. They dig and take samples of the rock. How they know what they know is beyond me, but they can tell if there's the chance of gold or silver, and then they're put to work, Jon said. Could some be sent north? He asked. I don't know. At present, having the gold makes the Lannisters wealthy. Should you find some in the north, it may affect that, Jon said. What if we made arrangements with them? Did a deal of sorts. We could offer them a part of it, and they could offer us their help in finding it or mining it if we did, he asked. You think your father would go for it? Jon asked. I don't know. If I could bring it to him as a possibility, perhaps, he said, and Jon laughed. What? My brother. I remember when all you cared about was getting an extra slice of one of Gage's pies. Jon said. Aye, and I remember when you weren't a king, Jon, he said, laughing back. You heard of the tourney? Jon asked. Aye, you going? We're going, brother. Lord Wyman has agreed to travel with us, Jon said. And Robb looked to see if he was japing and then slapped him hard on the back when he realized that he wasn't. "Thank you, brother," he said, and Jon looked at him confused. "I know were it not for you, then I'd not have this life, Jon, and I'm grateful for it, truly," he said. And Jon smiled at him. "I'm happy for you, brother. Now come. While not the same as gauges, we still need to move quickly. It's peach tonight, and Joy may not let us have any," Jon said with a laugh as they headed back to the rock proper. Jon was proved right, Joy sitting with the peach pie and deciding who got a piece, laughing as both Ghost and Grey Wind looked at her forlornly when she fed Dusk. Winifred told him that her grandfather had just let them know they'd be going to the tourney, and Willa seemed the most excited of them all. Even Loras and Cregan, seeming less enthused than his future good sister was about traveling to King's Landing. It was his cousin who told him why the next day, when they sparred, and Robb found his own enthusiasm dimming somewhat when he did. "It's to celebrate killing Jon's uncle, Robb, the idea of seeing his head on a pike," Cregan said with a shudder as he took Robb's sword and put it back on the rack. "He would do that?" he asked. "He will do that, Mother. Uncle Arthur, Loras, and Brienne, each of them have said so, and he means to celebrate his death. That's the main point of the tourney. Robert will show off Viserys' head, and will be expected to look and be happy," Cregan said. "Even Jon?" he said with a note of anger in his voice. "Even Jon," Cregan said, and they turned to watch Brienne and Loras go through their paces. Jon joined them on their ride the next day, and he and Willa and Winifred looked on eagerly when he and Joy got ready to race. The girl had left him and Loras in the dust when they'd raced days earlier, both Loras and Cregan laughing at his expense. It was only afterward he found out that she and Jon were the best on a horse, and perhaps not just the rock, but the West itself. "Who win?" he asked Cregan, his voice barely a whisper. "Jon. If he wishes. Winter and he are as one. Only Ghost or your own wolf could beat them. But it depends on the day. Joy wins some days." "He lets her win?" "Some days," Cregan said with a smirk. Today, it seemed, was one of those days. Winifred and Willett clapping happily when Joy took the race, and Jon whispering in Joy's ear, making her laugh. They stayed by the side of the stream near the tree, and Jon came over to speak to him once they'd eaten. "Take Winifred and follow Ghost. Stop where he leads you and meet us back at the rock," his brother whispered in his ear. "Jon, trust me, brother," Jon said as he walked away. Doing as he was told, he helped Winifred to her horse, Willa smirking at them as they rode away. It was just he and his betrothed, their guards, and both wolves, and they rode for almost an hour. The place they ended up at was a small hill, and they could see Casterly Rock in the distance. Ghost looked up at him, and for a moment he felt the wolf was going to drag him from his horse, Ghost only moving away from him when he dismounted. Helping Winifred do the same, he led her to where Ghost and Grey Wind were laying down, both wolves looking in the direction of the rock. And Robb couldn't stop himself from smiling. A note would have done just as well, brother, he thought with a chuckle. "Robb?" Winifred asked. "Jon told me to come here, said it'd be worth the visit," he said, taking his cloak off and laying it down so Winifred could sit on it. Once she had, Robb sat down beside her, both of them looking off into the distance. "Are you looking forward to the tourney?" she asked, and Robb shook his head. "I was," Cregan explained what it was for, though, and it spoiled it for me somewhat, though I do wish to see King's Landing, and traveling with Jon and the others should be fun," he said. "Aye, it should. He seems different," she said, looking to him. "Jon, does he seem different to you?" "Aye. I thought it was what happened with his uncle, but I think it's more than that. I think he's ready to take the throne," he said. "There's going to be a war?" she asked nervously. "Aye. I don't see any other way." "Will you fight?" she asked, looking to him. "He's my brother. I'll fight," he said determinedly. "Promise me you'll return, that you and I will have our lives together. Robb, promise me?" she asked, and he looked at her to see her eyes watering. "Winifred, I promise, I swear it by the old gods and the new. I'll not take any unnecessary chances, and I'll return to you, always," he said as he leaned in to kiss her softly. They kissed for a few moments, and he rubbed his fingers over her eyes, stopping the tears before they fell. Putting his arm around her, he felt Ghost brush against him, and when he looked to the wolf, he saw his head turn towards the rock. Both he and Winifred looked on as the sun set, the light shining down and casting the rock in gold. The reflections changed as they watched. Golden brown, red, bright orange, and then finally began to fade as the sun moved away. He turned to see Winifred was holding her breath, a smile on her face when she looked to him, and he kissed her again. "I promise," he said loudly in his head, and hoped he'd be able to keep it. River Run 297 AC. Cut. The ravens came and she looked at the seals, one bearing the hand of the kings and the other the seven-pointed star. She nervously broke the seal on the one from the High Septon first, eager to see if he had accepted her request. At first, she'd intended to just send a letter and then had changed her mind. A personal visit from Septim Ordained may stand her in better stead, she felt. Now reading, she'd soon find out if that was so. "Lady Catelyn, after a meeting with the most devout, we have agreed to accede to your request for the dissolution of your marriage to Lord Stark. We have prepared the legal documents, and they will need to be signed by your husband or yourself to take effect. Once done, then you are both free under the terms of the faith to wed once again. I look forward to speaking to you personally in the future. My lady, to discuss the other matters you raise, His Holiness, the High Septon." She almost cheered. Such was her happiness. Her plan had worked, and she poured herself a glass of wine to celebrate. Ned would receive a raven soon, and she could have him send one to the High Septon confirming he accepted. Taking a sip of the wine, she opened the other scroll and began to read it also, finding herself believing it a sign from the gods. "Lord Tully, His Grace invites you to the tourney of King's Landing 297 AC, a tourney held in celebration of the ending of the Targaryen line for good. We look forward to you and your party coming to celebrate this joyous occasion. Lord Jon Arryn, Hand of the King." While she wasn't sure exactly what the raven meant by end of the Targaryen line, and she was a little put out that the words were so formal, she welcomed the opportunity to travel to King's Landing. It had been moons since she had seen Petter, and she had worried it would be many more, but now she had the chance to go and speak to him in person, to explain her plan to him and to make arrangements for their wedding. She had gone over and over in her head to see if there were any other candidates, someone who would add to their own strength, and had found them few and far between. That she was a woman wedded, bedded, and who had given birth was problem enough. A maiden fair and true being what most sought. That she had also been set aside, and her age as well took some potential husbands off the table. The biggest obstacle, though, wasn't her. It was that those who could offer her what she needed were already wed. The Reach, Vale, West, Stormlands, all of them were off the table. Dorne was an option simply because Doran was unmarried, but she'd not consent to marry a cripple or to live in such a place. Not even the chance of making Ned and his bastards suffer could make her demean herself so, which also took the Iron Islands from the table. Though on her darkest of days she did consider it, especially given their own enmity with the North. No, it had to be Petyr. Not only was he the most palatable of the options she had, he was someone she could trust, and she cared for him also, even if not in that way. "Pearl?" she called out, and the girl came running. "Running, milady." "My brother, Pearl, has he returned?" "No, milady. I believe he's to return this evening," Pearl said, and she dismissed her. Over the next few days she found out more of the reason for the celebration, the king having executed Viserys Targaryen. That he had done so himself she cared not for. Far too much like his good friend in that regard for her liking. Edmure welcomed the chance to go to King's Landing as Lord Paramount, to be feted as he should be. And Cat too found herself keener to set out on the journey. "I believe the children will be there, Cat. Sansa for certain, but perhaps Robb too." Edmure said the night before they left. You really think so? She asked hopefully. I do. They traveled to Highgarden, and this is a far more prestigious tourney than that, even should he not come. Edmure refusing to say Ned's name ever since the letter had come. I'm sure there's a good chance that Robb may. I hope so. But even if they do not, we shall enjoy ourselves, brother, she said with a smile. Aye. That's the spirit. We'll have fun, Cat, no matter who else is there, he said, drinking his wine. She had wondered if she should let him in on her plans, and had in the end discarded the idea. Better she worked them herself than gave him the chance to mess them up. Despite the control she put on him, he almost messed up every chance he got, and she'd had to cover for him constantly. He'd even slept with a servant and gotten her with child, Cat having to force the girl to drink moon tea before she dismissed her from their service. She'd not allow another bastard ruin her life more than Ned's one already had, and until she was wed herself, this was all she had. Edmure, thankfully, though, still showed no signs of settling down, even if his behavior was becoming more and more of a problem. Soon she'd have power of her own, and the ability to make them pay for what they did to her. And so she closed her eyes and wondered what it would be like to lay with Pedder as man and wife. Leaving Riverrun the next day, their party was larger than most, Pearl coming along with her to act her maid and Utherides being left to act as Castellan. Looking back at Riverrun, she began to picture the ceremony in her mind, one better prepared and managed than the one she had there years earlier, though she bemoaned that once again it was not the man she wished that she'd be marrying. Dorne, 297 AC. Doran. Doran. The gods laugh when men make plans. Never had truer words been spoken, and Doran felt a fool for not taking note of him years ago. He had planned, plotted, and done little but not enough, made agreements, and worse, he had kept out of the fight when he should have done more. A betrothal agreement he held in his hand, one half of it an impossibility and the other unlikely. In his other, he held the reason why, the scroll from King's Landing showing him what waiting got him. Prince Doran, on behalf of His Grace King Robert Baratheon, I would like to invite you to the tourney of King's Landing 297 AC. A tourney to be held to celebrate the ending of the Targaryen line. We look forward to your attendance. Lord Jon Arryn, Hand of the King. He hadn't needed the second Raven to tell him what had happened, his spies having the information relayed to him before official word came from the crown. Viserys was dead, his head resting on a pike above Traitor's Walk, and with it lay Arianne's future as a queen. This route was gone now. Now again he was faced with a decision to make. One half of the agreement was still possible. Quentyn could rule if Arianne could not. But was it truly possible? Arianne had disappointed him greatly upon her return from the west. She'd not, as he hoped, gotten close to Jon Snow, not at least in the way he had wished. Instead, she, like Oberyn, seemed to see the boy as kin, as family, and that was not what he wanted or what he would accept. It left him in a delicate position, and one he knew he had to take advantage of, and needed to do so now. He is here, my prince. Good, send him in, he said, and heard Ariel behind him grip his axe as the Darkstar walked into the room. My prince. Sir Gerald, please sit, he said, and the Darkstar did as he was bid. You wished to speak to me. I did, Sir Gerald. You're an ambitious man, are you not? I am, my prince. I make no bones about it. But unfortunately, even ambition runs into obstacles. You wish to marry my daughter, and you know I'll not agree to it, he said, and watched as the Darkstar's eyes glared back at him, his lips tight as he spoke. I know, Sir Gerald said, his voice strained. What if I changed my mind if I did allow it? What would you do for me if I granted you your wish, Darkstar? He said, and saw how Gerald smiled at hearing him call him by his silly moniker. What it is you require of me, my prince. Something that'll come easy to a man like you. Sir Gerald, I wish you to kill a woman for me. Any particular woman, or can I choose? The Darkstar said with a chuckle. A very important one, but do it, and you and Arianne will be wed. I give you my word. Very well, who? Marjorie Tyrell. "Whew," he said, and saw the dark star smile even more broadly. "A rose. I think I'd quite enjoy that, my prince." He waited until the man was gone, and he was sure he was well out of earshot before he turned to Areo, his protector, looking at him with doubt in his eyes. "You don't approve?" he asked. "It's not my place to approve, my prince. I follow your orders and them alone," Areo said. "Speak your mind, old friend," he said, and Areo nodded. "You would allow him and Arianne to marry?" Areo asked. "I am a man of my word. The marriage will happen if Sir Gerald does his job, though he'll not live long enough for the betting," he said, and Areo nodded. "Then my concerns were as always for nothing, my prince," Areo said. "Yet they are welcomed all the same." With that taken care of, he waited to see why the lion had been brought to his domain. He'd not said anything much to Tyrion last time, and he wondered why he was coming back now. That he had spent a number of weeks in Sunspear without coming to see him was in some ways disrespectful, and in others, welcomed. Doran knew of his brother's friendship with the imp, and given his connection with Jon Snow, he wondered if he'd learned something he didn't know when the man arrived on the morrow. Sleep that night was haunted by bad dreams, arguments he'd had with his sister from years before playing out almost as if they were real. She too, as Arianne, had at times refused to do her duty, to do what was best for Dorne and her house, and they had fought over it many times. In the end, he had gotten his way, and he had sat back and waited for the next part of his plan. Aegon would marry Arianne, and he would see his blood on the throne, and just like with Viserys, the gods had laughed at him then also. My prince," Areo said, waking him from a terrible dream he was in the Red Keep, and Elia called for him, and even though he could walk, he never went to her. "What is it?" he asked, shaking the dream from his head. "It's almost noon. My prince, Prince Oberyn and Lord Tyrion have arrived," Areo said. "Send in my servants. I need to dress," he said, and Areo did as he was asked. He broke his fast as he met with them, Oberyn and Tyrion waiting in the sunroom for him when he was wheeled in. His brother ate a little, and Tyrion not at all, but Doran found his appetite was unable to be fulfilled, quickly eating far more than he usually did, something which Oberyn commented on. "Hungry, brother?" Oberyn japed. "I slept late, missed breaking my fast. I believe I'm eating 2 meals to your 1, brother." "It's good to see you hungry, brother," Oberyn said, and he nodded. On some days before they'd gotten rid of Kylot, he had found he had no appetite at all. "Lord Tyrion, what brings you to Dorne?" he asked, far more to the point than he usually was, which, again, Oberyn seemed to notice. "I come on a matter of great import, my prince, to me and I hope to you also." "Is this referring to my nephew?" he asked, and looked to Oberyn, who nodded. "In a way, my prince, but mainly your daughter." "How so?" he asked curiously. Asked curiously. "I wish to ask for her hand, my prince. I come with an offer of a betrothal," Tyrion said, and of all the things he could have heard, this was not one he expected. So he did the only thing he could. He laughed, and only seeing Oberyn's angry expression did he stop. "Forgive me, my lord, but many men have asked for my daughter's hand, and she herself would turn down most. I believe that would be the case for you also." "Not so, brother," Oberyn said, handing him a letter. Doran opened it and looked inside. The writing was clearly Arianne's, and he began to read, shocked at the words his daughter had written. "Father, I write to you with hope in my heart, hope that you will grant me what I wish for more than anything in this world. Tyrion is a good man, and he makes me far happier than I ever dreamed I could be. He's smart, funny, loyal, kind. He's loving, and he loves me, Father. He loves me as I do him. As Lord of Great House, and with the power of the West behind him, he brings far more to the table as consort than any other lord in the realm. That he's also someone Oberyn respects, someone that Ilaria thinks worthy shows just how good a choice he is. Our union will bring us and the West closer, Father. It'll strengthen Dorne, and not only will I gain a husband I already love, but also a man who I can rely on for advice and comfort when needed. I ask you this, not as a princess of Dorne, but as your daughter. Please, Father, allow me to be happy. Allow me to be with the man I love. Your loving daughter, Arianne. My daughter speaks most highly of you, Lord Tyrion, and yet I cannot agree to this match. Doran, Oberyn said angrily. No, brother, on this. I must be firm, he said before looking to Tyrion. Surely you understand, Lord Tyrion? He said, and saw Tyrion look to the ground before he looked back up at him, his expression schooled from him. I do not. Perhaps you can enlighten me, my prince. Is it that I'm a dwarf? Tyrion asked, his teeth grinding once he'd done so. No, my daughter sees no problem with it. And were you any other dwarf then, perhaps? But no, it's not that, Doran said. Then may I ask what it is? Tyrion said, dropping Doran's title, which he noticed immediately. Your father, Lord Tyrion. Your father ordered the killing of my sister and her children. And though he is dead and the men responsible have paid the price, you remain his son. Dorne will not stand for the son of Tywin Lannister marrying their princess, and neither will I, he said, and saw Tyrion smirk as he looked at him. He braced himself for jokes about being in a wheelchair, though they did not come. That's your only objection, my prince, who my father is? Tyrion asked as he looked to Oberyn, who for some reason nodded. It is, he said, and saw both his brother and the Lord smile. Then perhaps it's time you learned of a truth long hidden, Prince Doran, Tyrion said. Essos 297 AC, Dany. The further north they traveled, the more Missy and even the Unsullied seemed to relax. While the soldiers never gave much away with their expressions or their posture, over time, with Shiera's help, she had begun to see the difference, to see just how much they were changing. They relaxed more and seemed far more at ease, and knowing now that they too had felt as Missy had. Thankfully, like her, they soon began to accept and understand they were truly free. Cheeky and Eerie, she'd begun to get along with, though both women were at times strange to her. With Missy's help, though, she had learned some of their language, and the strange awkwardness was diminishing each day. They were camping by the Sarn, Sandor teaching 3 Unsullied how to fish, and they quickly having more success than he did. Aegon and Rhaegar were flying far ahead of them, chasing after far bigger prey, the dragons' appetites increasing along with their sizes. The dreams still came to her, though not every night, and as they traveled during the day she felt more and more she was heading in the right direction, and that she would find Sandorix, or him, her, soon. So much so that she had begun to make plans for what would happen once she did find him, or more precisely, she and Shiera had talked about what they would do once that happened. She was sure now that Sandorix was free from the mummer pretending to be her nephew, and while a part of her wished for nothing more than to find the boy who stole him, another part was thinking of her true nephew. With Sandorix back, she felt the only thing which could hold her back was waiting until the dragons were large enough to fly. Once they were, it would be time to go west and help her nephew take back their family's throne. Or if she found her nephew to be unworthy, then to take it for herself, though she believed he would be as she hoped, and she remembered the vision she had in Volantis of standing with him. Are you not hungry, Dany? Missy asked her later that night, the plate of fish untouched on her lap. What? Sorry, I was thinking, but no. Do you want it? She asked, and Missy shook her head but took the plate from her. Sandor would eat another portion, she had no doubt. How far are we from Qohor? She asked Shiera when Missy carried the plate away. Half a moon, maybe more, Shiera said. You feel them too? I do. I think they're near the city, but not at it, flying over the forests and eating and sleeping in them, she said. I believe so also. Rhaegar seems content, fully fed, and happy to stretch his wings, Shiera said with a small smile. Is it really for the best to let them fly so far from us? She asked. The same question she always had whenever she missed the dragons. It helps them, I think. Allows them to grow even more, and we move too slow for them. They can be near us in a day or so. They cover the same ground it takes us a day to in minutes. Dany and here there is not enough large game for them, so I think it's for the best. But, Shiera said, I miss them, she said softly. I know, I do too. When we fly with them, they'll wish to stay even closer, Shiera said, looking at her. They will, she asked. I believe so. The dragons once bonded won't wish to be parted from their riders. She slept well that night and ate fish the next morning to break her fast, Sandor and the Unsullied having caught far more than she'd thought. They were riding and heading north within a couple of hours of her waking, Sandor riding beside her and Missy sitting in front of her on the silver mare. She had given her some lessons on riding, but she found that she and Missy both preferred to have her ride with her. Why didn't you eat last night? Sandor asked. I wasn't hungry, she said simply. She said simply, you feel unwell? He asked, looking at her. No, I just wasn't hungry, she said with a soft smile, and looked to him to see him nod. They'd been riding for a few hours when he suddenly set off riding fast ahead of her, Dany looking to Shiera, who seemed just as confused as she was about why he'd done so. He rode back even faster and shouted to Grey Worm, telling him to turn and head for the rocks to the west, to ride hard. Once he had and the carts were turned around, he rode to her and Shiera. You see those rocks over there? Ride for them now. Go, as fast as you can. Take those 3 with you, and the girls with you, Sandor shouted. Sandor? She asked. Go and get your fucking bows ready when you get there. He shouted, and she nodded and did what he asked. They rode fast, and the silver carried her and Missy as if they were a single rider, never faltering or slowing in its run. Soon she was in front with Shiera, Irri, Jiki, and the 3 Unsullied behind her, and she saw the rocks come more clearly into view. They rode into the middle of them, finding them to be, while not very large, enough for cover if it was needed. Given how Sandor and the others were racing towards her, she felt it would be. Sandor, what is it? She asked, as he directed the Unsullied to move to tie the horses behind them and grab their supplies from the carts. Men, a lot of them, and riding hard, Sandor said. Dothraki? She asked, wondering if this was Khal Drogo returning, and looking to Jiki and Irri, both women's expressions, letting her know they were not just as Sandor's words did the same. No, these are different. I'd say sellswords, he said, directing the Unsullied where to set up. Maybe they're nothing to do with us? Shiera said, you think we're that fucking lucky? Sandor basically growled. These men mean us harm, trust me. What should we do? She asked. Set up and cover, get your bow ready, and call the fucking dragons back, he said, and she nodded and moved to do what he asked. Grey Worm organized their men. 6 of them had been learning to fire bows mainly to help in hunting, though she knew Sandor also wished them to learn in case it was needed, something it clearly was now. While they were nowhere near proficient, like anything else they did, they gave it their all, and she knew they would be able to take men down. Though hiding in the rocks was not to their strengths, nor was splitting them up and breaking their shield wall. But if Sandor wished them here, then Aventi Unsullied wouldn't argue with him. When she finally saw the size of the group they faced, she saw why Sandor had brought them here. It was far too large for them to be able to beat, 100 strong, and all of them coming towards them. She closed her eyes and reached out, trying to find Aegon and Rhaegar, hoping they could feel her need and that they would come soon. Make ready. Sandor shouted, and she put the arrow in her bow and held it taut. The men stopped out of range, though, and 3 of them broke off from the main group and rode towards them. A parley of sorts, she heard Grey Worm say. As they got closer, she saw they were Eswy, the one in front with his blue hair and beard marking him as a Taroshi. The other 2 were far less colorful, and all 3 were well armed, the blue-haired Tyroshi having a Dothraki arak on his hip. You can come out. We mean you no harm. The blue-haired man set a grin on his face. We're fine where we fucking are, Sandor shouted back. We only want the girl. The rest of you can go in peace, one of the other men said. Fuck off, Sandor replied. We have you outnumbered, boxed in. You'll all die here and we'll take her anyway, the third of the men said. Over my dead fucking body and a fuckload of your men's, Sandor said with a laugh. Or you could just come out and fight me, beat me, and we'll let you go. The blue-haired man said. But, Danny caught the wink he gave the other two. Who the fuck are you? Sandor asked. Dario Naharis. Perhaps you've heard of me? The blue-haired man said with a smile. No. I'd have remembered the name of a stupid fucker like you if I'd heard it, Sandor said, and she looked on as Dario grimaced and went to move his horse forward, one of the others holding him back. So you'll not take me up on my offer? Dario said after a few moments, calming himself before he spoke. I'll make you a counter. You and your men can go fuck themselves, Sandor said, and she heard the laughs coming from the three of them. I'll keep you to last. You can watch when we take the girl one by one. I've never wetted my cock in a princess before, Dario said. The arrow flew true, and were it not for the man wearing something on his chest, he'd be dead. The three men racing away and back to the others. She heard Sandor's footsteps behind her and turned to see him looking at her with a small grin on his face. Next time, go for the horse, he said, and she smirked as she put another arrow in her bow. They watched as the group split into four, the men moving to encircle them, and she felt scared for the first time in years. Ever since she'd been with Sandor, she'd felt, while not invulnerable, almost so. That scared little girl she had once been was long gone, and she'd not missed her at all. Now, though, she felt scared not for her but for those with her, for Missy and Grey Worm, for the Unsullied and Jiki and Eerie, for Shiera and for Sandor. She knew they'd not survive this attack. The numbers against them were far too high, and Danny felt responsible for those who were with her. She had rescued Missy for what? Freed the Unsullied for what? Shiera had joined her because she was her kin, and Sandor was with her to protect her. But if she was not here, then they would not need to be. They'd, while perhaps not being safe, at least live until tomorrow. Maybe I should go to them, let them take me, she said softly. Missy and Shiera, closest to her, both shaking their heads. Men such as them would not let us live, Danny, Shiera said. I don't wish you to go, Danny, Missy said softly, the little girl showing far more bravery here than she was. The dragons? Sandor asked, and she shook her head, watching as he took a knee and leaned in close to her and Missy, Shiera moving over to them. When you get the chance, you take the horses and ride fast. Ride south back to those woods we passed. You ride for your lives, he said as he reached over to muss her hair. You hear me, you fuzzy fucker? I hear you, she said, and saw him smile as he moved to the rock closest to them and knelt down. Soon his sword was drawn and his eyes were closed, his lips moving in some silent prayer. She heard the sound of the hoofbeats as the horses charged, and she raised her bow ready to fire. Looking behind her, she saw Grey Worm hold his spear, and to her left, Sandor had drawn his greatsword. Shiera held her daggers and Missy a small knife. Around her she could see the dust as they came from all sides. She closed her eyes and settled herself before opening them, ready to fire. The flames came before the roar. Those in front of them soon covered as the dragon flew on, roaring as he did so. The group to her left were next, and the roars grew louder as he flew on towards the others, the ones to her right and behind them hurriedly changing direction. The dragon let them ride on, not bothering to chase after them, instead flying back towards the rocks and roaring once more before he landed. She moved from where she was and ran to him. Her son had come to her when she needed him most, and she looked into his eyes through her own teary ones, leaning her head against his. Sandorix, she said softly as she stroked his head, her son trilling as he looked at her. With Jon away and her lessons being dull, she was finding things at Casterly Rod boring. Even Balerion wasn't able to improve her mood, and so she was happy when her father came to visit. More so when he told her that he wanted her to come to Castamere with him when he returned. Later, when she found out that Ashara and Kragan would be going too, she began to eagerly await leaving. It had been just over a moon ago that she had found out that Liara's real name was Ashara and that she was Jon's aunt. Jon telling her that she, for now, had to hide who she was and that it was up to Jor to help her to not be discovered, telling her it was serious, but also making a little game of it for her. For Joy, it was easy enough to do so. She and her father had spoken, and Ashara had talked to her too, so she knew how important it was that no one found out. She was a little annoyed that her friends couldn't come with her, but her father explained that a Castamere Ashara could be herself more, and if they brought her friends then she could not. When it was time to leave, she said goodbye to all her friends and to her aunt and cousins. Loras, Satin, and Brienne came to wave her off, and she waved back at them as they departed. Joy race? Cregan asked, and she smiled. Glad to have someone to have fun with on the trip. On 3, she said. And as soon as her father counted down, she was off, beating him easily, but losing to dusk. It took them a long time to get to Castamere, and though she mostly rode on apples, she did also take time to sit in the carriage with Ashara when she could. Finding that when she did, Ashara would make lessons of the things they saw on their journey or tell her stories of Jon's family. She found she liked some of those stories. Jon had told her some also, and she'd read some, but Ashara told her ones that even Jon didn't know. At Castamere it was as it always was. Here she was the Lady of Castamere, and though some of the people who worked here would call her Joy, here most called her Lady Joy, and she hated it. She knew she was to be the lady, but even compared to Casterly Rock, it was different. People bowing to her or asking her what she wanted, she missed Alessia, who just did things and called her by her name. Papa, when I'm lady, will I be able to have my own servants here? She asked him as they walked around the keep to check on the work that had been. Have some of the servants disrespected you, princess, not done as they should? Her father asked. No, Papa, it's just. She sighed. I wish they were more like Alessia. I don't understand. Respectful but not afraid, she said, and her father nodded. I'm sorry, that's my fault. I'll talk to them, and you and Ashara can begin to pick which ones you prefer. He said, looking at her. Thank you, Papa, she said, and he smiled down at her as they walked through the now nearly finished tower. I want you to be happy here, Joy. When it's time for you to come and stay, I will be Papa, she said. Between her, Ashara, Cregan, and the length of time she was staying this time, she soon found herself with a group of servants who seemed to understand her better. None were as nice as Alessia, but still, they had at least begun to understand how she felt, and more of them had started to become more friendly with her. Her lessons at Castamere were much different also. Her father's maester taught her about the mines and the village and how many people worked here, while Ashara continued her other lessons. The mines and the village were her favorite part of being in Castamere, though. Riding to them, eating in the tavern, and talking to the men, even seeing the gold being taken from the mine itself was fascinating to her. She and Cregan would speak to people in the village or the mining barracks. They would walk around with Dusk and her guards and find the men to be funny and the children happy. I like it here, she said as they sat by the lake. It's quiet, different from the Rock or Lannisport, but it's nice. Cregan said. Will you come to visit when I'm lady? She asked. Of course I will, and you know that Jon will come often. Loras, Brienne, and Satin too, he said, and she smiled at that. At night they held dinners which, while they were not feasts, were even bigger than the dinners she usually had at Casterly Rock. Her father liked to have most of the people who worked here eat with them, the steward and his family, Sir Davin and his new wife, and their guards and many others. She noticed that while no one called Liara that here, few called her Ashara either, and yet Ashara seemed far happier here than she was at the Rock. She would sit with them at their table along with Cregan, her father, and herself. Over time, she began to see that Ashara and her father would laugh and look at each other the same way Jaime and Daisy did. Cregan seemed to either ignore it or to have already seen it, or for her, it was new, and she found herself watching them both more closely, so much so that she was eventually caught by Ashara, who then whispered into her father's ear, making him turn to look to her. Joy, can we talk? Her father said, and she nodded, sure she was in trouble. She was taken to her father's room and she wondered what her punishment would be. Despite the games she would play, the pranks she and Jon or she and her friends would pull, she was rarely punished. Usually just not allowed to go for rides or to practice knives with Jon, something her aunt had argued with him about, but her father had just laughed about. Cragen too taught her when he could. But Jon's teaching was better. He showed her things that Cragen wouldn't, like where to hurt someone who wished to hurt you and how to get away from someone who grabbed you. Cragen taught her like she was a girl. Jon taught her like she was who she was, and she loved him even more for it. Joy? Joy? Her father said, and she shook her head, trying not to smirk at the fact she was lost in her thoughts. Sorry, Papa, I was thinking, she said softly. It must have been a funny thought. I can see your smirk, her father said, and she found he was smirking just as she had been. Come sit with me, he said, and led her to the window seat. Papa, she asked, having expected to be chastised in some way, only for her father to look at her oddly before he spoke. Ever since your mother passed, I've wanted you to have someone in your life that you could think of that way, her father said, and she gulped. She and her father rarely spoke of her mother. Both of them would usually get upset when they did so-and-so. They almost never did. Jon, though, spoke to her when she brought it up. He, too, had lost his mother, and he knew what to say to her and how to cheer her up when she got upset about it. He would even make up stories of what her mother was like for her. Papa, we don't, she said, her voice cracking. We do, Princess, her father said with a smile. I wanted you to have that, to know what it feels to have that person in your life, for you to feel a mother's love. I know your aunt does her best, but I always wished I could give you that. It's all right, Papa, I have you, she said, reaching out and trying to cheer her father up. Always, you have me always, but I couldn't replace your mother, Joy. There is no one who could, and so I never tried. He looked at her with a smile. Until I met Ashara, I never even thought I'd find anyone else, he said, and she wasn't sure if he was really saying what she thought he was saying. You want Ashara to be my mother? She asks, slightly confused. I want you to give her a chance to be Joy. I love her, and she loves me. I want her to be my wife, and for us to be a family. Is that, would you? Could you? Her father said, his voice shaky. I could, she said as she thought about it. I could, Papa, she said as he hugged her tightly. Over the next few days, she and Ashara talked about it. She wasn't trying to replace her mother, but she would if she'd let her be a mother to her. They began to speak about living at Castamere, and it being them all. She, Cregan, her father, and Ashara. When she asked if that would mean that Ashara would be Lady of Castamere, both Ashara and her father took it the wrong way, both telling her that she was and would always be the lady. Joy, then having to explain that it wasn't her inheritance she was speaking of. No, I mean if we're here, would Ashara be who they looked to as lady? Who they sought to run things? She asked. You mean the duties, like Aunt Jenna has or Daisy has? Her father asked, and she nodded. She would. You'd have to play your part too, Joy, but she would. Good, she said with a smile, happy that someone else could have that responsibility and she could be herself for a little while longer. She was sad to leave Castamere when they did. Their dinners had become something different near the end of their stay there. While they'd still eat with the others in the great hall, they'd also have quieter dinners for just the four of them, family dinners, and she found that she liked these best of all. When they arrived back at Casterly Rock, she was happy to find that Jon had returned, and she got to spend time with the other part of her family, Jon being very happy to see her too. She had always thought of him as a big brother, and while he never called her little sister as he did Sansa, she knew he thought of her that way, and with her father soon to marry his aunt, they'd be family by blood as well as choice soon. She had even got to ride on the dragon with him, Jon promising to take her up again when they had more time. When she found out they were to go to King's Landing for a tourney, she felt excited. She'd see Sansa and Marjorie and watch Jon and the others fight. As she packed, she went to the drawer and took the small knife that Jon had gifted her for her last name day, placing it near the top of the chest just in case, smiling as she remembered him giving it to her. You're giving me a knife, she asked excitedly. You should have one. And if anyone, Even if their prince ever tries to scare you, hurt you, or grab you, you know what to do, don't you? Jon said. Aye, stick 'em with the pointy end, she said, smiling. Oh. Dorne 297 AC, Tyrion. Telling a long-held secret was a hard thing to do, and to tell it to a man you hoped would be your good father was even more so. That Oberyn was sitting with them as he got ready to speak was something he was incredibly grateful for, and yet his mouth was dry and his words jumbled in his head. He reached for the wine glass and took a quick sip and then looked to Doran. Lord Tyrion? Doran asked. My mother was a beautiful woman, my prince. I'm not sure if you ever met her, he asked, and Doran shook his head. The only person who could make Tywin Lannister smile, they said of her. She, Queen Rhaella, and your own mother were friends, did you know that? I was aware of it, Doran said. Oh, good friends who spent a lot of time together, I believe. That's why your mother came to Casterly Rock, to seek a betrothal of either Elia or Oberyn to my brother or sister, or both even, he said, and Oberyn nodded, which your father refused. Doran said pointedly. Tywin refused. Aye, but let's not speak of him, and instead speak of my mother. As I said, the three of them were friends, good friends, with your mother and Dorne. Though my own spent more time with Rhaella, more time around court. With her husband being Hand, and her friendship with the Queen, she spent more time around Aerys than most did, and Aerys too thought my mother beautiful. Tyrion said, with Doran looking at him as Tyrion composed himself for the next part. Tyrion, if you wish, Oberyn asked, and he shook his head and smiled at his friend. My mother loved her husband, my prince, but Aerys was a king and used to getting what he wanted, and he'd not let a little thing like marriage vows stand in his way, he said as Doran gasped. They were lovers? Doran asked, surprised. If only, he said with a snarl. As I said, my mother loved her husband, and Aerys wanted what by rights he couldn't have. But what does a king care for rights, for vows, or even for consent? He said angrily. He took her against her will? Doran asked, and Tyrion thought he detected a note of sympathy in his voice, with the Kingsguard guarding the fucking door as he did so. Tyrion said with a grimace, I'm sorry, Lord Tyrion, truly. The man was a monster, Doran said. Oh, he was, and he was also my father, Tyrion said, and Doran looked to him, and then to Oberyn, and then to Tyrion again. But how? How could you know this? Jon found out while we were in Essos. When we returned, he told Tyrion, and things began to make more sense. Oberyn said as Tyrion couldn't speak for himself, the emotions rising within him. More sense? Doran asked. Lady Joanna was murdered, brother. Murdered by the maester at Casterly Rock. At first we thought it was to push Tywin down a particular path, but we've soon found out it was for another reason, the same reason they went after Rhaella's babes. Oberyn said as he looked to him. To stop a Targaryen being born. Doran said, and Tyrion saw Oberyn nod. I was born Tyrion Lannister. My family are lions just as Jon's are wolves, but I'm a dragon, Prince Doran, a Targaryen, and uncle to a future king. Tyrion said when he felt able to speak, This changes things. Doran, he's not Tywin's son, Oberyn said. Huh. What proof do we have of this, Oberyn? Forgive me, my lord, but while I believe you, believe Jon and my brother, what proof do we have of you being Aerys' son? Doran asked. We have my nephew's word. My prince, Jon, sees me as his uncle, as his kin. He's who named me as such, and his word carries more than enough weight on this. When he sits at the throne, I'll be known to all as a prince of the blood, Prince Tyrion of House Targaryen. Tyrion said, looking at the prince. He'll legitimize you? Doran asked. You think he would not? brother a boy raised as a bastard. You think he'd leave his family to be known as such? Oberyn asked. No, I don't. But this isn't just about Lord Tyrion. It's about Arianne. She may wish this match, but she's a princess of Dorne, and it's my job to ensure there are no questions asked. There are some who may say that this is just a way for us to join our houses, that it's a mummery. Doran said. Oh, even after they see me ride a dragon? Tyrion said, and Doran gasped loudly. You can ride a dragon? Doran asked. Rhaegar is my dragon, just as Rhaenys is Jon's, he said proudly. I need some time, forgive me, Lord Tyrion, but I need some time to work through this. We'll eat tonight, and we'll speak more on the morrow, Doran said as he nodded to Areo, and a moment later a man came in to wheel him away from them. He reached out and took the glass of wine, drinking it down in one gulp before he looked to Oberyn. His friend was looking concernedly at him, and Tyrion's poor attempt at a smile didn't do much to make that concern go away. I know how hard that was for you, my friend, but my niece is worth it, no? Oberyn said, and Tyrion found himself chuckling. She is, do you think? He asked nervously. I do, come. The Water Gardens have much to offer, and my girls wish to see you, Oberyn said, and Tyrion followed him as he led him to the pools. Ellaria was swimming with some young children. The two youngest of Oberyn's daughters, Dorea and Loreza, swam close to their mother while the older ones just rested their toes in the water when they saw their father. Though all four girls ran to him, Ellaria unable to keep even the youngest from him, the little girl yelling excitedly, Papa, Papa, my sweet girls, did you miss me? Oberyn asked, and each of them nodded. Tyrion watched as the prince played with them, as he and Ellaria doted over them, and the girls each vied for their father's attention. He was introduced to them, and the older ones took great delight in them being his size, bigger in the case of Elia. Within a few moments of being with them, he felt better. The emotions of what he'd said to Doran soon fading away. Dinner that night was the same. Doran was quiet and seemed to be watching him. Oberyn was his usual self, and Ellaria and the girls were who he spoke to mostly. Each of the girls seemed fascinated by him. Ellaria saying it wasn't his height but his newness, a new face in his place being a rarity. He slept that night with the smell of perfume on his body, little droplets that he put there from the bottle Arianne had given him. So you think of me when you're alone in your bed, she said, handing him the bottle. I always think of you when I'm alone in bed. He said back, getting a smile from her in return. But now you'll think of my scent, my taste, and when your fingers travel you'll know that mine are doing the exact same thing, she said huskily. Laying in the bed, he almost laughed when his fingers began to wander, shaking his head and trying to figure out if anyone had ever made him feel this way. Even here without her, she was all that was on his mind. As his hand moved lower, he closed his eyes and pictured her doing the same thing. Waking the next morning, he broke his fast with Oberyn, Ellaria, and the children. Doran was not one who enjoyed big meals first thing. Instead, he was someone who preferred quiet when he broke his fast. They were standing by the pools when the servant came and asked them to follow her, Tyrion and Oberyn soon being led into Doran's solar. The prince was sitting there waiting for them. His face was unreadable to him, though Oberyn smiled, and when he saw that Tyrion began to hope. My daughter's happiness is very important to me, however. It alone cannot be the reason why a princess of Dorne marries. Alliances, a suitable and worthy match, improving Dorne's prospects, all of this must be at the forefront of every decision I make. Doran said. Oh, indeed, my prince, Tyrion said. Were you a Lannister, my lord? I'd have continued in my refusal. The actions of Lord Tywin would leave me with no choice. While Aerys was just as terrible a man as he, to my people he is perceived far better, and so you have my permission to wed my daughter, Doran said, and Tyrion felt almost ready to cheer out loud. Such was his joy. "I thank you, my prince, truly," said happily. "I do have conditions, my lord," Doran said. "Oh, my prince, I cannot allow the wedding to occur while you're a Lannister, so once you're named officially as Tyrion Targaryen, then, and only then, can you and Arianne be joined. That is your only condition," he asked. "Oh, there will be trading considerations, a pact between Dorne and the West, other such simple things, but that's the crux of it, yes," Doran said. "Oh, then I gladly accept," Tyrion said, looking to Oberyn, who was smiling broadly. "Good. Now I'm sorry to cut the celebration short, but I take it you've not heard the news from King's Landing?" Doran asked. "No," Oberyn said. "Huh. Viserys is dead, killed by Robert's own hand," Doran said, and Tyrion found himself shaken from the little daydream he had been having of how he and Arianne would celebrate this news. "But how? He was in Essos?" he asked. "The Magister handed him to the crown personally. Robert executed him, taking the sword from Sir Ilyn to do so," Doran said. "Oh, Jon?" Oberyn said softly. "Will no doubt know by now. Apparently Robert wishes to throw a tourney to celebrate," Doran said. "Oh, of all the things," Oberyn said angrily. "I need to send a raven to my nephew," Tyrion said. "I'll see it done," Doran said. "Oh." Tyrion knew the news should be affecting him, hurting him, and making him feel something that he wasn't feeling right now. The problem was that not only did he not know Viserys, and so not feel much for him, he was feeling better than he could ever remember. Both his head and heart were in a much happier place. She would be his wife. They would be wed. Tyrion Lannister. No, Tyrion Targaryen would be getting a princess for a wife. That alone would be more than he could ever have dared to hope. That the princess in question was Arianne. It was more than he had ever dared to dream. Wintertown, Flea Bottom, 297 AC, Bethany. 3 moons. She'd been here, and each day she woke up knowing that she and her family were safe and that they would eat. Compared to the life she had on Lord Bolton's lands, it was night and day. There some days they go without, and ever since her husband had passed, it was more and more of them. Even working in the dirty tavern didn't earn her much coin or keep food on the table, but she had done her best for her 2 girls. When she heard the men speak of the offer in the tavern, she couldn't believe it. They were leaving, and she did her best to get them to take her and her children with them. She soon found herself walking behind a cart, Daryl and his wife agreeing to let her girls ride with their own children, but not having the room for her. It took them some time to make it to the King's Road, and from there to Winterfell. It was a long walk, and she wondered what she'd find when she got there. Now, 3 moons later, she set the table, and Barina and Branda, her girls, sat down to eat the warm porridge, both girls looking happier and healthier than they ever had. Sitting down beside them, she looked around her new home. She'd only moved in a few weeks earlier, and it put the hovel they had lived in before to shame. The girls had a warm room, and her own was almost as big as their whole house had been. "You girls looking forward to your first day?" she asked. "Aye, Mama," Laura said. "We'd learned to read." Branda said excitedly. "So I've heard. You're to go to Sarah's house after you understand," she said. "Aye, Mama, we will," Barina said. Once the girls had eaten and she had cleaned up, Bethany walked with them to the large building she'd be leaving them in. They and a group of other children would be the first to learn to read here, Lady L having sent men to each of their houses to see who wished to learn. As soon as they had reached Bethany, she had asked for her girls to be given the chance, being able to read and write a boon she'd never expected for them. "Now be good, and I'll see you later," she said, smiling as they met up with Sarah's girls and walked into the building. She then walked to the tavern to begin her day's works, cooking, cleaning, and listening. The coins she earned more than she had thought possible. The tavern was as always busy, and the pies and soup were wolfed down by the men and women who were there, Bethany carrying them out and serving them herself when she wasn't preparing the next batch to be cooked. She listened out for the little bits of information that may prove useful, Travelers being the best source, and though none of it meant much to her, he always paid well, and she never had to make something up. It was dark when she finished her work and walked back to her house, stopping off at Sarah's to collect the girls. Once they'd eaten and told her of their day, she put them to bed. Both girls were tired and so were asleep when he came, Bethany in the middle of her own meal when he knocked at the door. "Any news for me?" he asked. "Only that the Lord and Lady are soon to be wed," she said, and the man nodded. "That the new ship carries even more men and women this time, and that Lord Bolton has put an end to anyone leaving his lands, too many having left already." "Is the Lord planning to speak to Lord Stark of it?" he asked. "I don't know. It's not something anyone has said." "Very well. I'll see you next week," he said as he placed the coins on the table and left. She finished her meal and locked up, grabbing the coins and walking up the stairs. After checking in on the girls, she entered her own room, the fire soon burning away in the corner as she pulled out the small chest from the hole in the wall. Inside it was her most valuable things, a handkerchief that had belonged to her husband and a bag full of coins which she added the others to. After placing it back, she went to her bed. She had earned more since she came here than she had ever had previously, enough to eat and live well, and enough so her girls would have something when they were older. Closing her eyes, she rolled over to fall asleep, a small little smile on her face. Though it was Lord Stark and the lady who were making Wintertown what it was becoming, among the older people they spoke of, how it had not been his idea to do so. They spoke of how the Lord had not done anything with Wintertown for many years, and it was not until his son had come back that he'd even begun to do so. She heard tales of how he had helped the North, tales from people of how he'd helped those in the South who came on the ships. It was the older residents of Wintertown, though, that seemed to have the truth of it as far as she was concerned. Jon Snow had brought the wolves back to Winterfell. The White Wolf had come to save them all. Jacelyn Waters. Even since the tourney life had been better, they ate actual food and not whatever they could fill a bowl of brown with. Being 3 and 10, he was almost the same age as the lady and young lord, and so he looked at them differently than his mother or others did. He liked that others had heard of how he put a fish in his place and won the tourney, even if it was for boys of their age and not men. That he also turned out to be a bastard meant more to him, as he too was one himself. When he and his mother had stood and watched them and heard what they said, he had not believed them. Why would they help? What did they care? Even when they got the first package of food, he had thought that would be that. They'd eat well for a day or two, and then it'd be back to normal. The packages kept coming, though, and over time he began to believe that maybe things would stay this way. Maybe they were different than the rest of them. He had almost lost that belief a year or so later when his mother fell ill. They had no money for the healer, and he had no way to earn it. It was when he was collecting his package that the man asked, was he well, and Jacelyn had broken down and cried, telling him his problems. The man had made him follow him and taken him to a large warehouse where he talked to another man. "Wait here," he said, and Jacelyn almost ran away, but something made him stay, some voice in his head making him wish to wait and see. "Where do you live, lad?" an older man said after he'd been waiting for a while. "My mother and I have a room, sir," he said, looking to the man. "I'm no sir, name's Artos. Come, let's go see your mother," Artos said. "Why?" he asked, looking at the man suspiciously. "I hear she's ill. I'm going to take a look and see what I can do for her lad," Artos said. "I have no coin," he said sadly. "You won't need any. Come, the longer we stay here, the less time I have helping your mother." Jacelyn couldn't believe it. The idea that someone would come to help without the offer of coin was beyond him. He walked hurriedly with Artos back to his house, and when they got there, he found his mother trying to clean up, coughing as she did so. "Ma, you need to sit, to rest," he said, trying to make her sit down. "I'm good. I need to work. Who are you?" his mother said when she saw Artos. "I'm here to help. You're ill. I'm here to have a look and try to make you well again," Artos said. "Jace?" his mother asked. "Please, Ma," he said, and she nodded, Jacelyn helping Artos bring her to her bed. He waited a long time, and when Artos came back, he didn't look happy, Jacelyn immediately fearing the worst. Your mother needs to rest to stay in bed. I'll have one of the men bring you your packages, but you need to stay with her." "Will she get better?" he asked worriedly. "She needs to take this every day. Give it to her in her soup," Artos said, holding up a small jar. "Just a pinch," he said, taking an amount in his hand to show him. "Every day?" he asked, and Artos nodded. "Every day. I'll be back in a couple of days to check her again. Do this. Keep her in bed, and she'll be as right as rain in a few weeks," Artos said. The man was true to his word. He came back and checked Jacelyn's mother 4 times over the next 2 weeks. The food packages were delivered to their door and contained extra fruit, which he made his mother eat. When talking to Artos before he left, each time Jacelyn learned more about him. He'd left the Maesters and now worked for the Lord and Lady Jon Snow and Marjorie Tyrell's coin, paying his wage and for the packages he ate. And when his mother got better, Jacelyn thanked the gods for them both. Over time, he grew bigger and stronger, and when he heard of the offer of a new life in the north, he couldn't wait to tell his mother. It took them some time for their place on the list to come up, but when it did, they didn't have long to wait to leave. Standing on the docks, he wondered what the north was like, how cold it truly was, and would he really have a better life there? He also knew that his mother worried even more than he. "Are you sure about this, Jace?" She asked him when they had gotten to the docks. "I am. Ma, Jon, and Marjorie pay for this ship, just like our food and the healers. The north is where he's from, and they're bringing people there for a better life," He said, "How do you know?" "Artos told me I should do this. He saved you, Ma. When you were sick, he saved you. Because of them, he was able to. Because of them, we've got a chance to live better," he said, and she nodded. He held his mother's hand as he walked up the gangplank. Around him a crowd of people, all looking for the same thing he was, and all wearing the same expressions on their face, all of them full of hope for the future. Casterly Rock, 297 AC, 4th Moon, J. Harry's Targaryen. The dragons were gone, flying somewhere that Rhaenys refused to tell him about. Rhaegar, too, staying silent for now. He had tried to warg into her to see where it was she was going, and to Rhaegar, too, but they refused to allow him. Rhaenys only telling him that it was something they needed to do. Given that he was leaving to go to King's Landing, it was probably for the best. It also allowed Sorella to come with them, which he was happy about. Still, it had only been one night, and he missed them both, finding that he already wished it was over and he could be with them again. He had spent his name-day night with his sister and son, laying against them as he contemplated what it meant and what he would soon be doing. Rhaenys, too, speaking her thoughts aloud in his head, bringing up comparisons he'd not wished to think of. "Father should have named you Doran," Rhaenys said. "I'm happy with my name," he replied. "You'd be the young dragon reborn, conquering a land at 4 and 10 and coming to your throne," she said. "You think it'd be that easy? I think you were born to be king, little brother, and king you will be, and anyone who stands in your way will fall," she said, and he smiled. "I'm glad you're with me, Ray." "Of course you are. It'll be easier with a dragon," she said with a laugh. "No, I'm glad you're with me, Ray. You, my sister. I'm always with you, Jay," she said. He packed the candles away. Alongside his gifts, Joy had gotten him another book. This one perhaps more apt, given that it covered Daeron's conquest of Dorne. Jaime had gotten him a wardrobe of clothing, the 3-headed dragon, and his family's colors clear. His friends had joined together and had a new saddle and shield made for the tourney, and Jenna had gifted him his armor, from her brothers, and Tyrion too. Both Robb and Wyman had been just as practical, a northern cloak from Lord Wyman and his family, and a wolf pendant from his brother. As for Marjorie, he had asked, and she had agreed, nor to gift him anything, to instead hold it for when they met, and so he could gift her too. They had met once since his last visit. A few days after news had come from King's Landing, he had begun to feel strange, heading back to his room. He lay down and found himself walking through the woods. "Jay," he heard her call out. "Marjorie," he shouted back. And when he saw her, he ran towards her, lifting her up and holding her in his arms, standing there looking at her as she began to speak. It wouldn't work. Jay, I tried, but for some reason it wouldn't work," she said as he brushed her hair from her face. "I don't understand. I thought it would." "Did you do anything different this time?" he asked, as she shook her head. "No, after what happened, I didn't want you to be alone. I needed to see you," she said, and he kissed her, closing his eyes and enjoying the feel of her lips on his. "Maybe that's it. Maybe it's times of crisis or worry or something else. Will you bring it with you?" he asked, and she nodded as he led her to sit against the tree. She sat between his legs, her back against his front, leaning back against his chest as he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "This is it, Marge. The last time he takes anything from me, I'm ready," he said as he stroked her hand with his own. "Are the dragons truly ready, Jay?" she asked worriedly. "Meow, they are. I'm going to beat him, Marge. I promise you I'm going to beat him," He said, "So we can be wed soon. Be married for true?" she asked. "We are married for true, but we can be wed in the light of the seven soon, be together, share the future together," he said, kissing her cheek. "Together," she said, kissing him back. They lay and talked, telling each other the things they'd done since last they met, speaking of how much they missed each other and how happy they were to be meeting soon, neither of them really wanting to leave and yet knowing it was time to do so. He kissed her again and watched as she walked through the woods and then turned to walk away, not seeing the raven as it watched from a distant tree. He had woken with a headache, finding that he'd slept all through the night, and since then he wondered if she had done so again, if she had tried to meet him, or if she had decided to wait until they met in King's Landing once more. He carried his chest from his room, Walder, and Jor's helping him while Arthur readied the horses with Richard. They'd be taking 2 ships to King's Landing, Jenna and Kevin in one, and he, Jaime and Garion in the other. They said their goodbyes on the docks, the Lion's Mane carrying Jenna and the others, while they would go on the Lady Joanna. Lancel and Willow were a little upset to be parted, and Wyman's refusal to allow his granddaughter to travel with him did not go down well with the girl. He helped load the horses with Joy, Arthur, and Laura's, all of them bringing their own mounts to the tourney this time. "Want to stand on deck, Joy?" he asked once they'd settled Winter, Star, Apples, and Bluebell. "Watch the birdies, John," Joy said, smirking. "And the fishies," said, looking back. "As long as there is no trout. I hate trout," Joy said, making a face. And then she winked at him, and he almost fell over. He was laughing so hard. "Come, let's see if we can make a bird dance like last time," he said, and she walked with him up the stairs and out onto the deck. They were soon joined by the others, Arthur and Walder standing behind him with Jor's, Loras, Brienne, and Cregan a little further back. He looked back at Lannisport as they sailed away and closed his eyes, the birds flying high in the sky, the doors open wide and ready for him to enter. He reached out to more, and he saw them all. Casterly Rock, Deep Den, the Gold Road, and the Stony Sept. And then he was over King's Landing itself, the pigeon welcoming him in. He flew over the Red Keep and then looked north, soon leaving the pigeon behind. He had no need to see what rested on the pike ad. He'd already seen it more than once. No, he needed something different, something to clear his troubled mind. Soon he was over Rosby and then Antlers, before he saw them flying over the Isle of Faces, a voice calling him and speaking to him as he soared and moved from door to door. "The end is the beginning," it said, and he felt himself being flung forward, all doors shut to him except one. The bat shouldn't be awake. It was daylight, and it lived for the night. And yet while its brethren slept, it could not. What was worse, though, was it was not itself, and it had no control as it flew, no idea of its destination, and no reason as to why it could see changes in light and shapes. All it knew was it must fly, and fly it did over dark walls and broken towers, over the melted stone and disused rooms. It flew, and it watched as below it, what was once empty was soon full. Banners fluttered in the wind, the gray wolf and the black stag, the blue falcon and the golden rose, and above them all, the three-headed dragon. It flew down and close, past a maiden with long dark hair beating three men with a wooden sword, past a large man drinking and laughing loudly while a quiet man sat beside him. On it flew and landed by a tree where it roosted and watched. A silver-haired man spoke to men wearing white cloaks, men who listened to every word, and then the bat saw no more. "Jon?" Joy said from beside him, and he opened his eyes looking to see as Lannisport finally went from view. "What? Sorry, I was supposed to make the birds dance, wasn't I?" he said. And she nodded as he reached out for the nearest gull. Highgarden, 297 AC, Olenna. She knew as soon as the raven came that things had changed, events forcing them to move much more quickly. Mace scrambling, trying to make sense of what it said, and trying to once again convince her of why they needed to be joined to the Baratheons. Willis and Ellery doing the work of settling her idiot of a son down and explaining without explaining why that was a terrible idea. With Viserys dead, Robert would think he'd won. True, he'd know that Daenerys still lived, but he'd not fear a girl with Viserys gone. Instead, he'd do as he had just announced. He'd celebrate it. But it wasn't Robert she was thinking of, nor was it Viserys or even Daenerys. It was a Targaryen who was much closer, and what he would make of this news that Olenna tried to concentrate on. Given what he had lost, how much of his family had been taken from him, Olenna knew that he'd not handle this well. She didn't need Margaery to tell her, though her granddaughter did anyway. She didn't need the raven that came from Jon or the one that came from Jaime Lannister. Even when Margaery came to her with talk of a strange tale of seeing Jon and speaking to him, Olenna didn't need to listen to what she said. She'd known what this had meant the moment Robert took Viserys' head from his body, and so she got ready to play her part. Organizing most of the Reach Lords to travel on this trip to King's Landing wasn't hard. Both the King's request and having Mace send out his own ravens would see to that. She sat at her desk, her fingers pressed against her cheeks, and waited until her grandson came in. Each moment she waited, raising her annoyance until he finally entered. "Forgive my tardiness, grandmother. Father wished to speak to me." Willis says he came and sat down in front of her. "Your father should know better, as should you, but I'm in no mood to chastise either of you right now," she said with a sigh. "Preparations are made for us to leave?" "They are. Do you really wish to travel by road, grandmother?" Willis asked. "I do. I wish to meet with the others before we arrive, and it's better to do so over time. The longer I spend with them, the more I will come to know their minds," she said, and her grandson nodded. "I wish you to come with us also," she said, surprising him. "Grandmother, you're wasted here. I wish you to be in King's Landing, to be by mine and Margaery's side, and to be with me when I speak to your father." "You're telling him?" Willis asked, surprised. "I believe I will be on our return as soon as we've left King's Landing," she said. "You truly believe we're that close? After what Robert did to Viserys, I'm almost surprised to find that the Red Keep still stands, Willis," she said with a snort. "Jon wouldn't, would he? He hasn't, and that's a good sign, but I guarantee it crossed his mind. That boy has lost far too much family. As it is, we're very lucky he considers us part of his now," she said with a small smirk. "When do you think?" he asked, as she didn't need him to say any more than that. "We'll be at war before the year is finished. Willis, I doubt he'll wait longer than that. I'll make my arrangements. Garland will stay," he said, and she nodded. She drummed her fingers on the table when he'd gone, thoughts fleeting as she played things over in her mind. The tourney would be dangerous ground, and all she could do was try to figure out where the Bannermen's minds were. Nothing could be said to them without Jon's approval, and even with it, she may need him with them to speak to them himself. Tarly, Rowan, Ashford, and Redwine, Hightower, and Fossaway, all would need to be brought on board, and it would take a dragon to do so. Baxter, though, she needed to bring his children back, to take Hobber and Horace from King's Landing, and to keep them close. They would need the fleet to be free and not be able to be used against them. Even if the Lannisters controlled the seas, their ships would need to be ready to be brought to bear. She got up and walked from the room, strolling through the halls and out to the gardens. Sansa, Marjorie, Mina, and the little hens were all speaking excitedly about the upcoming tourney. For Olenna, though, it filled her with trepidation. Memories of Harrenhal loomed fresh in her mind, and with it thoughts of the future they had come so close to. While Jon wasn't his father, even though he had dragons and had done most of the work already, she still found herself worried as she looked to her granddaughter. "Marjorie, a moment, child," she called out, and watched as her granddaughter walked towards her. "Yes, grandmother, walk with me, sweetling," she said, and Marjorie took her arm as they walked along the path in the opposite direction from the others. They did so silently at first, Olenna wanting to make sure they were far enough from where they could be overheard before she spoke. Once she was, she directed her granddaughter to the summer seat and had left and right stand back and make sure they were not disturbed. "We must be careful in King's Landing, Marjorie. I know you're looking forward to seeing Jon again, and may wish to be as affectionate as you would like, but you must not, my child. You must act properly, now more than ever," she said. "I understand, grandmother. I will," Marjorie said. "If I had my way, I'd not go to this tourney. Instead, I'd call our banners and ready for war," she said, hearing the little gasp come from Marjorie. "But Jon," Marjorie said. "I understand, and I hope it's not the folly of youth, but it's one thing to think of what Robert has done, another to have to witness him celebrate it. Even his best friend couldn't bring himself to do so many years before. For Jon, I fear it will be even worse," Olenna said as she reached out to touch Marjorie's face. "He'll need you, and you'll wish to be with him. You cannot, Marjorie, not there." "I can wait, grandmother. I've waited this long. Soon this will be over and we'll be together. I can wait until then," Marjorie said determinedly. "Good. Be who they expect you to be, Marjorie, not who you truly are," she said, and saw her granddaughter smirk. She sent a raven to Paxter asking him to come to the tourney and to Baelor, her family. She could trust, and she knew she could not hold back with them much longer. At dinner that night she was quiet and contemplative, Willis and Marjorie also not saying much, while Mace spoke loudly about the tourney. Her son, looking forward to seeing Loras compete and to travel to King's Landing and meet the king. Olenna, despite her worry, feeling likewise, even if they were thinking of different people. It took 3 days for them to gather all their supplies and get ready to set off, and in that time she'd found some of her worries fade away. They would go and play a role and be loyal subjects of the crown, and she would watch everyone with a keen eye. Their next steps would define her family's future, secure it or end it, and though there was risk, the reward made it all worthwhile. So that was what she concentrated on as she climbed into the wheelhouse. "Well, are we just going to sit here all day, or are we setting off?" she said grumpily before the wheelhouse set off, the smile on her face, though showing her true feelings. "The Lady Joanna, 297, AC, Jamie." Joanna slept comfortably beside Daisy, his daughter not caring that they were on a ship, Daisy's worries proving unfounded. Instead, he had listened as Joy and Jon told her about the adventure she was going on and the big city she would soon see. They had then helped to wear her out by playing with her while he and Daisy ate. By the time they'd come back to the cabin, she was ready to sleep. And as Daisy lay down beside her, soon she was sleeping too. Over the course of the journey, he, Wyman, Richard, Arthur, and Jon had spoken of what to expect when they got there, Jon surprising them by saying that he'd already seen Viserys' body. Then surprising them even more when he spoke about Harrenhal and how he needed to see it for himself, asking them questions of their time there. "I need to know what each of you saw, what you know of my mother and father's movements, and of Robert and Jon Arryn's," Jon said to them as Arthur looked to him. "Are you sure of this, Jon?" he asked. I've to see it. It's time for me to know more about it," Jon said, and Jamie looked at him trying to figure out why now. "I didn't see much of Jon Arryn, Jon," Robert was just as you expect, but I saw him with your mother only twice. Once sitting at the table during the feast when your father sang, and once when we had just arrived." "Cha," Wyman said. "As for your father, apart from the feast, it was only during the tilts themselves. I saw more of your father than your mother. I mean, knowingly of your mother. It was only when we searched for the night that I realized the truth, Jay. But your father and I spent time together. We drank and laughed, and I was with him almost every day." Richard said. "You know of my own time, Jon," Jaime said, and Jon nodded and gave him a quick smile before he looked to Arthur. Arthur was more concise than any of them, telling Jon which days he spent with Rhaegar, and which he was with him when he was with Lyanna, saying that if he wasn't with Rhaegar, then Barristan or Oswell was. "Is that enough?" Arthur asked, and all eyes looked to Jon, who nodded. "I believe so. I needed guidance, thank you," Jon said. Over the next few days, he watched as the bandage never left Jon's hand, Arthur telling him and Richard that he was bleeding himself each night, storing the blood up for when he used the candles. While this concerned him, Walder, Jors, Arthur, and even Richard said he shouldn't be worried, and Jon constantly tried to reassure him. "What I'm attempting, my lord, requires a lot of magic, a lot of blood. I need it there and ready, and I can't take the risk that there won't be enough," Jon said. "Is it not hurting you, making you weaker?" he asked. "No, I feel good. I'm well. As Sorella tells me, as long as I eat and drink enough, rest when I feel tired, then I can do this more often." "You really think you need this much?" he said, picking up the jar which was nearly full. "For what I want, I do. Why is it so important to you, Jon? You know pretty much what happened. Why do you need to see it?" he asked, still not sure of the reason. "They want me to see it," Jon said, looking at him. "The old gods, they wish me to see it. There's something there, Jaime. I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, they wish me to know of it." "When?" he asked. "I think I'll be ready when we arrive at King's Landing," Jon said with a smile he knew was to reassure him. But he wasn't sure if it really did. He tried to put it out of his mind, doing his best to concentrate on other things such as the tourney itself. Daisy wishing to compete, and he not wanting to. Loras, Brienne, Robb, and Cregan. Speaking of the melee, and Jon sitting quietly saying nothing of his plans. He knew that both Jon and Loras were competing in the joust, and he held no worry for them there, the melee though he did worry about. None of them had competed in one truly. Brienne had in Highgarden, but there was something about a tourney in King's Landing that made it different. Be it Robert's own excitement, the size of the prizes, or the fact that more people would be in attendance, the tourneys were more dangerous there than anywhere else. Over the years, men had died in jousts and on the field, though he wasn't entirely sure if that was why he was nervous or not. "You're pensive," he heard the voice from behind him as he stood on the deck, the city coming into view. "Aye, Jon, I am. I am too. The tourney and knowing what will come after. We'd be fools not to worry, and yet we'd be wrong not to be excited too, my lord. War is nothing to be excited about, Jon." "I'm not excited about the war, Jaime. It's what we'll do when it is done. My father's letters, the words he wrote, the things he planned to do once he was king. What was it he said to you before he left?" Jon asked. "When this battle's done, I mean to call a council. Changes will be made. I meant to do it long ago, but King. Well, it does no good to speak of roads not taken. We shall talk when I return," Jaime said, repeating the words for the first time in their entirety. "Changes will be made. The rest doesn't matter. Jaime, only that. Together we will bring those changes to Westeros. Together we will fulfill the promise that my father would have brought." Jon said, "Together, my king," he said as Jon touched his back and walked away. Once he had gone, Jaime dropped to a knee and closed his eyes. The prayers he said were to any god who'd listen. The seven who are one, the red god of the old gods. To each of them he called and begged. "If someone has to fall, take me, I beg of you. Take me and let him live. Take the father and not the son, the sinner and not the sinned against." His words, whispered and lost to the wind. Lyanna. She had been angry and sullen on the whole trip here. Even being away from her father hadn't helped her mood. Though it was her brother she was angriest about over that, Ned prattling on and on about how Robert would be so happy to see her. What cared she for Robert's happiness? And why didn't her brother care for her own? That Brandon was also as sullen and annoyed as she was didn't help the travel either. Benjen at least was in a good mood, her brother enjoying seeing the lands around them for the first real time. He'd traveled a little before, but not this far south, and so seeing the Riverlands had been an experience for him. For her and Brandon, not so much, and all Ned could speak of was hopefully rejoining with Robert and Jon Arryn when they reached the Crossroads Inn. Something she was more than happy didn't come to pass, as they had arrived before the Lords of the Vale. Seeing Harrenhal for the first time, though, did impress her, even the bent towers and blackened stone only adding to the place in her mind. That there were so many tents and people already here was a surprise, and as she looked to see the flags flying over the main keep, she saw Brandon look away when he saw the trout. The black bats of House Went and the trout of House Tully were both flying at the same height, and above them the three-headed dragon flew majestically. Does that mean the dragons are here? Benjen asked excitedly, never having seen a member of the royal family, something she too was excited about. Aye, it does, so best be on your best behavior. I won't have you doing something that brings the family's name into question, Brandon said before laughing loudly. That's my job, after all. Lyanna couldn't resist the smirk, and when they rode to where their tents were to be set up, she was glad that she was considered a lady. Not that she thought of herself that way or that she was averse to helping put the tents up, more that she wished to explore and see more of Harrenhal, maybe even a glimpse of the Targaryens. She, like Benjen, had never seen any of them, and she wondered if the books were right and their hair was as silver as she imagined it to be. She bought a candied apple from a stall and had just finished it when she heard the noise. Moving to see what it was, she saw the three boys beating up the smaller one. Looking around, she soon found the wooden sword that someone had discarded and picked it up and moved forward. That's my father's man you're kicking. Leave him be. Go or I'll break your damn legs, she said as she swung and hit the first of the boys, the second getting a smack across the side. I'll fucking, the third one said, but the two smacks she hit him soon had him moving away. Go, or I swear, the next hit will be much harder, she said, glaring at them with the wooden sword raised. Come on, leave the frog eater with the ugly girl. We'll find better sport elsewhere. She watched them walk away as she helped the man up, finding him smaller than she when he stood. It was only then she truly noticed the sigil on his tunic. The lizard lion was almost completely covered in mud. You're a Crannogman, she asked, and the small man nodded, looking away. Howland Reed, she said softly. House Reed is sworn to my father. My lord, I'm Lyanna Stark, she said with a smile as Howland looked at her. Forgive me, my lady, I didn't know, he said, almost shrinking away. Come, Lord Reed, let's get you cleaned up, she said. And though he looked at her as if he was going to refuse, in the end, he walked with her back to her tent. She introduced him to Brandon and Benjen, Ned having stepped out to speak to Robert, who just arrived, Lyanna glad she'd not been there when he had. When they spoke of the feast that night, Howland said he would leave, and it took all she had to convince him to stay, even more to make sure he agreed to come with them. Ned thankfully came back alone, though his attempts to make her care about Robert fell on deaf ears. Robert is looking forward to seeing you, Lya. You were the first thing he asked about when I met him, Ned said with a large smile. Was I? Lucky me, Ned. This is Lord Howland Reed. He's to be our guest for tonight's feast, she said, happy to change the subject. Lord Reed, an honor, Ned said, as proper and polite as ever. Lord Eddard, Howland said almost quietly back. Lya, Robert, Ned began, but she interrupted him before he could say much more about his friend. Ned, Howland was telling me of how he has no finery for the feast tonight. Benjen only brought one outfit, and Brandon's would be too large. Can you help him out? I have more than one, but will it fit? Ned asked. Find something. I'll fix it, she said determinedly, and Ned moved to the chest. Lady Lyanna, there's no need. I shouldn't go to the feast. Why not? You're as high-born as any of them, and you're my guest. You wouldn't refuse a lady, would you? She said, her voice taking on a mock coyness, but her grin and eyes showing she was pretending. Never, my lady, Howland said with a smile. Stupid, stupid. Her brother was stupid and she hated him, she thought as she stood by the tree, the tears still falling from her eyes. The feast had been fun and she had enjoyed herself, even with Robert's at first clumsy attempts to speak to her and then his later drunken groping of women in her eyeline. She didn't care what he did and he didn't shame her. She had no intent to marry him anyway, and not even her father could force her to do so. Instead, her eyes had been drawn first to the 3 boys from earlier, watching to see who they served. House High, House Blount, and House Frey, a pitchfork, porcupine, and 2 towers showing who they were. Soon, though, her attention was drawn to the high table and to the king and prince when they came and sat down. 2 more different versions of dragons one could never hope to see, one broken and the other glorious. By the time he took out his harp, she already thought him the most handsome man she had ever seen, feeling her chest rise and fall rapidly when she looked at him. When he actually began to play, though it was like nothing she had ever heard before, the melody deep, and it stirred something in her heart that only riding a horse had ever done before. Just listening to the song made her feel free. All her worries, concerns, doubts, all of them drifting away, and she hadn't even noticed she was crying. Are you crying? Benjen said with a chuckle. You are. By the gods, you're actually crying over a song, Benjen said. The wine had been instinct, and she was mortified when the prince looked her way, not even seeing the smile on his face or the small nod he gave her. Instead, she had practically run from the tent and found herself standing alone by the tree, her anger and embarrassment forcing more tears from her eyes. My lady, a soft voice said, and she looked to see a handkerchief being handed to her. Thank you, my prince, she said when she turned to see him standing there, the moon casting its light down, making his hair almost glow in the night. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, lady? He asked as he took her hand in his. Lyanna Stark, my prince, she said softly as he kissed her hand, his dark eyes locked on her gray ones. Harrenhal, 281 AC. AC, Rhaegar Targaryen. Had he not already known why his father needed to be replaced then, his thoughts on his wife would have been enough, yet he also knew he'd never allow them to be parted. Despite it being what Elia wished for, what she needed, not just for her heart, but for her health too. It was yet another reason he was so desperate for this tourney, to be the success he intended, and why he glared at Varys each time he saw him. The eunuch had convinced his father to attend, and Rhaegar found his plans in disarray because of it. Everywhere he went he was watched, and it was only when he was doing his father's bidding that stopped the spies from following. Walking out to the feast were it not for Rhaenys in his wife's arms and the fear he held for them, he doubted he would have even attended, though by the end of the night he was glad he had, and looking at the girl as she walked away, he knew she had taken his heart with her. It wasn't what he had come to find at this tourney, not what he had sought, but over the next few days, he found himself so enraptured that even Elia knew. His wife warning him to be careful, and telling him if she could see it, then others could too, his cousin watching him like a hawk. Not that he cared for Robert's feelings in this, Lyanna having made it clear without question from him how she truly felt about her betrothed, that Robert himself was doing his best to shame her most every night, not helping his case, but perhaps earning Robert even more scorn from his betrothed. Arthur, I need your help, my friend, the Lady Lyanna. I'd like to meet her when I can, he said to his lealest knight and oldest friend. My prince, please, Arthur, he said, and his friend nodded and arranged for their meetings. She was smart, funny, wild, and free of spirit, and after 2 meetings he knew he was in love with her. Each time she looked at him, he found his heart racing, and he could tell she felt something for him too. By the third time they spoke, he knew that Elia needed to know, and so they spoke alone in their tent while Rhaenys slept, his wife kissing his cheek and giving him her blessing. "Once we've replaced your father, once you take the throne, we announce the dissolution and our children's place in the line," Elia said. "Children? You mean your? I'm with child. If it's a boy, you have your heir. Rhaegar and I've done my duty," Elia said. "You've done your duty, Elia. I hope he makes you as happy as she does me," he said, and she smiled as she kissed his cheek. It was madness, sheer madness, and he prepared for the onslaught from his wife. She had agreed with him that what Lyanna had done deserved recognition, deserved praise, and so he had praised her, though far more publicly, and with far more consequences than he had ever imagined. Seeing her sitting there as he took the joust, knowing deep in his heart he was winning it for her, the world had simply disappeared. All he saw was her, and as he rode to her and the crowd hushed, as he lay the roses down, it just felt right. That they were winter roses should have been a sign, and he wondered if that had played any part in his decision. "You love-struck fool," Elia said, though there was no anger in her voice, only worry, and that in a way felt worse. Rhaegar stood alone by the tree that night and worried she'd not show. He was terrified of it if he was being honest with himself. Lyanna came, though, and he could see her anger, and unlike Elia, she unleashed it all at him. "What were you thinking?" she shouted. "Liar." "No, don't you call me that. You don't get to call me that. What were you thinking?" she said angrily as she pushed her finger into his chest. "I wasn't," she said softly. "And that's supposed to make it all right, make it better. My brother is furious with you. Robert is threatening to kill you, me, anyone who'd listen." Lyanna said, walking from him. "He threatened you?" he asked. "No, not really. He still has his balls, doesn't he?" she said, and he laughed. "This isn't funny, Rhaegar. I know. I'm sorry," he said. Why crown me?" she asked, her voice much softer now. "I wished to honor you for what you did. At least I told myself that at first. But it's not the truth," he said. "Then what is?" she asked, her voice more curious now. "I wish to crown you," he said nervously. "Why?" she asked. "Because of you. Because of how you make me feel. When I saw you, I couldn't." "I'm sorry," he said, looking at her. "You're a married man, Rhaegar. I'm betrothed to another," Lyanna said, shaking her head as she moved away from him. "Do you wish to marry him?" he asked, and she shook her head even more vigorously. "If I wasn't married, would you? Could we?" he asked. He didn't get his answer until they were ready to leave Harrenhal, the note coming to him asking him to meet her that night in the Godswood. Making his way there, he saw her standing by the tree and moved towards her, happy to see the smile she gave him as he did so. "I got your note," he said as he reached her. "Obviously, you're here, aren't you?" she said back with a chuckle. He began, but she interrupted him. "Your wife came to see me. Is it true?" she asked. "What? That she? Is it true that you're to separate? That she's going back to Dorne?" "It is. My father wished us to marry, and I tried, Elia tried, but we never loved each other. Her heart belongs to another, as does mine," he said, looking to her. We can't, not now, but if she goes back, then perhaps," she said, her voice shaky. "Robert?" he asked. "I told him I'd not marry him, that I felt nothing for him. He blamed you, but I told him there was nothing between us," she said. "And is there anything between us?" he asked. The kiss they shared preyed on his mind all the way back to King's Landing. Nothing had ever made him feel that way before. The future that he had a glimpse of was now so clear in his mind, and he knew that there was only one path in front of him now, one road, and he looked forward to traveling it with her. Harrenhal, 281 AC. AC, Brandon Stark. Grandin Stark. He looked at her as they lay together, the hills covering them from anyone's view. Though they were fully clothed and apart from the fact they were together, they were doing nothing wrong. She smiled and he stroked her face, her eyes glistening as he kissed her softly, and he found that he was lost in their beauty just as he had been since he first saw her. It was different, though, seeing her at the feast, speaking to her and asking her to dance with Ned, his brother too shy to do so for himself. Brandon finding himself too shy to ask her to dance with himself also, glad to be able to cover up how he was feeling by using Ned's name. Watching them, he became jealous, and he at first wondered if that was why he made to bed her, though as they had lain together, he had known it wasn't. In the days that had followed, he had spent whatever time he could with her, quickly finding her so very different than any of the other ladies he had known. Comparing her to his betrothed was like comparing a spark to the shiniest of stars, and even after that first night, he knew he was lost. Brandon had thought he had loved Barbary and had tried to feel the same for Catelyn, but looking at her in the morning light, he knew his heart was hers, and hers alone. "What?" she asked him, smiling when she saw him looking at her. "I was just thinking how impossible you are," he said with a smirk. "Impossible?" she asked, her brow furrowed. Impossible. Nothing in this world should be as perfect as you. Nothing," he said as she laughed. "I'm far from perfect, Brandon Stark," Ashara said as she laughed, her purple eyes full of mischief. Maybe you're just perfect for me then," he said as he kissed her again. That night at the feast he had to sit with his family, his sister lost in her own daydreams, and he found he couldn't falter for them, even though hers were far more impossible than his own. He danced with Catelyn and saw Ashara look to him, her face full of hurt and betrayal, and he felt his heart break at the sight. She left before the dance was over, and soon he did too, feigning being unwell and refusing to allow AC of them to return with him back to their tents. He found her waking the grounds alone, and he almost had to chase after her, seeing the tears in her eyes only making him feel even worse than he already had. Thankfully, she agreed to speak to him, though, and he walked with her from the grounds of the keep, past the tents, and down to the God's Eye, the Isle of Faces somewhere out beyond their view, lost in the mist that covered the lake. "You know how precious a weirwood is to a Northman?" he asked as they stood there. "I know," she said softly. "Of how a vow in front of one is a vow to our gods, a vow we can never break." He asked. "I've heard that," she said, still not looking at him. "Howland told me that on the Isle of Faces there are more weirwoods than you can count," he said, and she turned to look to him. "So, it's not just one I swear this vow to, it's all of them. Brandon, I love you, Ash. You, and only you. You're who I wish to marry, who I wish to spend my life with, and no one or nothing will stand in our way. I vow this in front of the old gods, and may they strike me down if I tell a lie," he said. "Brandon," she said, shaking her head. "I'll speak to my father and tell him how I feel. Tell Hoster I won't marry her. Ash, nothing can make me do so. Will you be my wife?" He asked, his voice far more nervous than he had ever been. "I'll marry you," she said, kissing him. He said his goodbyes to her the next morning. They had lain together once more, and she ended up leaving before he did. When it came time for him to actually leave, he found his misery had some company, as Lyanna too seemed as upset as he was, though he was hopeful too, and looked forward to speaking to Hoster and his father, to let them know of the choice he had made. As Ned and Robert spoke, he looked to see Benjen and Lyanna whisper feverishly, and he wondered what it was they were speaking of. Given how Robert was looking at his sister, he could tell what he and Ned were discussing and could see his sister cared not for it. Her mind like his on other matters, no doubt, and he began to wonder if they could help each other out, both of them speaking to their father. He'd have to listen, would he not? If neither of them wished to go through with their betrothals, then he'd have to make other arrangements, wouldn't he? When Robert left, he sighed when they were joined by the Tullys, and was glad that Catelyn didn't ride. The idea of having to speak to her all the way to River Run, too much for him to contemplate. Instead, he listened as Ned groused about Robert, about Rhaegar, and laughed when Lyanna slapped him before riding away. She should do her duty, Ned said, and Brandon shook his head. Not all of us are you, brother, he said before he then rode off after his sister, Harrenhal, 281 AC. AC, Robert. God, she was good. Her mouth the very best he'd ever had, and soon he found himself spending the few coins he gave her. She welcomed, and he quickly fixed up his breeches and left the tent. He made his way to the feast and hoped his lateness wasn't noticed. She'd already made her feelings clear more than once with her looks, if not her words. When she deigned to look at him at all that was, though as Ned said she was young and a maid, and no doubt he made her nervous, she ignored him again, and so he began to drink, smiling and winking at the girl who served him, and enjoying it when she winked back. At least someone appreciated him, Robert thought as he drank some more, the girl's flirting becoming more obvious, and he grabbed her whenever he got the chance. He heard the hush when the dragons arrived, and he prayed the man wouldn't sing again tonight, though he had to hand it to Rhaegar. He did know how to win over the ladies. He looked to Jon, who was watching the high table, his foster father glaring at Aerys and Rhaegar too, and Robert found himself thinking more and more about his words, though for now he put them out his mind and concentrated on the view the serving girl gave him as she placed the mugs on the table. As he stumbled back to his tent that night, he couldn't help grabbing her arse, the girl laughing as he did so, and he looked forward to the night ahead. Robert, the melee, Ned shouted as he shook him awake. He asked, "The melee, Robert. Gods, how much did you drink last night?" "Fuck," he said as he moved from the bed. His head and his balls hurt, and he looked beside him, glad to see the girl had left. "I'll be there in a moment, Lyanna," he asked. "It's up in the stands. Hurry, Robert, or you'll miss it," Ned said, and he dressed quickly. Who? He was more angry at he didn't know, Jon Royce, for taking the day which should have been his, or Lyanna for not showing him any attention whatsoever. Each time he had taken an opponent down, he had looked to her, sure she'd be looking down and cheering him on, and each time she was doing anything but. It angered him, and he used that anger to beat more men, only to fall before the end. To make it worse, she cared not for that either. And so he was sullen for the next few days. His attempts to speak to her met with indifference at best and outright refusal at worst. So he drank more, and even got into a drinking game with Sir Richard Lonmouth, the man laughing before he fell to unconsciousness, though he did later help him try to find the errant knight. "Who do you think it is, Robert?" Sir Richard asked. "I don't know, but we'll be the ones who find the fucker," he said with a laugh as they searched. Haha. As each day of the tourney went on, he felt worse and worse. Nothing he could do or say seemed to be met with anything but a polite smile, and as soon as she could, she would make an excuse to leave him alone. He spent more time with Ned than he did his sister, and it was frustrating him no end. The night before the joust began, he had tried to kiss her and she'd slapped him, though at the time he'd laughed it off. The next morning, how she looked at him made him think she wasn't just japing. "Cheer up, Robert. For fuck's sake, you look as miserable as you say I always do," Ned said as the semi-finals of the joust took place. "Do I indeed? I wonder why that is," he said, shaking his head. "I told you, Robert. Ever since she found out about Maya, it's been different," Ned whispered in his ear. "I've only the one, Ned. It's not like I've fathered a dozen or more," he said, shaking his head. I know." The final had even him excited at seeing Rhaegar against the bold. While jousting wasn't something he saw the benefit of for himself, he did like the pageantry of it, and the wonder of who would be crowned. With Rhaegar, he knew it would be Elia. But for Barristan, he wasn't sure. Would he crown the princess, or was there a fair maiden that the bold had his eye on? Damn him. Damn him to the 7 hells. Who does he think he is? Robert shouted as Jon Arryn tried to calm him down as Robert paced in his tent later that day. "I told you, Robert, they care not about what is theirs and what isn't. This is why they must be removed." You told me and I didn't listen. But I'm listening now. Ours is the fury, Jon. Ours is the fury, and he'll feel mine. He left a few days later, and she never even spoke to him, the memory of what she had said in the Godswood still twisting like a knife in his heart. She was his. She would be his, and no one would take her from him. No one. As he rode away from Harrenhal, he cursed that Ned wasn't with him. Though he was glad Jon was. His foster father was right, hard to get. She must be playing it. She must. I'll not marry you, Robert. Even were I not in love with another, I'd not marry you. Her voice in his head as he closed his eyes, and he felt himself grip the horse's reins even tighter. Mine, she is mine, he said as he rode towards the Vale. The Vale of Arryn Harrenhal, 281 AC, Jon Arryn. He looked down at his papers as he sat in his solar, his life's work in front of him, and he found himself trying to figure out his next move. The betrothals were set, the Starks tied to the Baratheons and the Tullys, though having Hoster tied to the Lannisters would have been a boon. He had even considered offering up Elbert to Tywin. Cersei and his nephew as Lord and Lady of the Vale would be a good match, he felt. But the man refused all his letters, and he knew he would need to speak to him in person. Once the weddings took place, they could make their moves, bring the dragons down, and see Robert crowned. His foster son was the only logical choice to sit the throne, he felt, even despite his unsuitability. Though with him as hand, he could easily cover for Robert's deficiencies. He got up from his seat and walked from the room. They would be leaving on the morrow, and he wished to pray before he left, to seek counsel from the gods and from Sept and Lalams. As he entered the Sept, he lit the candles and knelt in front of the Father, praying that they'd soon be in a position to see his dreams complete. The 7 kingdoms united under a king of his choosing, and the true gods, the only ones worshipped throughout the realm. My lord, I didn't expect to see you, Lalam said as he walked over to where Jon was kneeling. I wished to come for guidance before I left Septon. He said to his oldest friend, Your path is the gods' path, my lord. You walk in their light, trust in that, Lalam said, and Jon nodded. Did the boys come and pray? He asked, and Lalams nodded. They did. Young Ned took the blessing, though he liked it not. Robert too. Good. I fear Ned a lost cause. Septon, his faith in the heathen gods of the north is much stronger than I had hoped, Jon said. Perhaps, or perhaps, the gods haven't shown us the right path to take with him yet, Lalam said, and Jon looked at him. No matter. He will serve our gods in the end, Jon said. As do we all, my lord, Lalam said before he blessed him, and Jon left to make ready. He allowed Ned and some of the others to ride on once they passed the bloody gate, his ward wishing to meet up with his family, and Robert wishing likewise, though Jon wouldn't allow him that, instead saying it wouldn't be proper for him to travel with his betrothed, and Robert then riding off in a huff. Go, Ned. I'll deal with Robert, he said, and watched as Ned reluctantly left his friend behind. Like with most things with Robert, he ranted, raved, got drunk, and then quickly forgot what it was he was upset about. Jon shaking his head at the sheer failure he'd had in teaching the boy anything of being a man. Were it not for his position, he may have sent him back to the Stormlands years earlier, but needs must, and Lalams was right. They needed a man of faith to lead their cause. Not that Robert was such a man, but at least he could be relied upon to leave such matters up to him, and given his aversion to wish to rule, there was clearly no better choice for a puppet king. Arriving at Harrenhal, he was annoyed upon finding out that Tywin didn't attend, though given that Aerys did, he began to see a pattern, and when he saw Jaime Lannister named to the Kingsguard, it all became clear. Tywin hadn't been ill or resigned because of it, as he had been told upon his arrival, nor was he unable to travel to the tourney. The man was annoyed. The dragon had pulled on the lion's tail and taken his golden heir from him, and Jon saw even more opportunities. Opportunities that just kept coming as the tourney developed, and he knew then he was doing the work of the true gods. While Robert ranted, raved, and drank elsewhere, Jon stood in his tent with his nephew and Jan listening to them speak. Gods, what was he thinking? Elbert said, Dragons don't think, Elbert. I thought you knew that by now. Jan said, the disgust clear in his voice. To shame his wife so, Jan, Elbert said. And Jan shook his head. Like father, like son, Jon said as they both looked to him. Come on. We've all heard the words, how Rhaegar was a better man, how the realm would be better off under him. Would a better man do what he just did? No, Albert said. No, of course not. But I had thought. Jon said, and Jon reached out and put his hand on the man's shoulder. They all have it, Jon. With some, it's just better hidden than in others, but they all have it in them. He said and saw Jon nod reluctantly. He sat down and drank his wine and found himself laughing to himself after they'd left. This wasn't his plan, nowhere close to it. The prince was far too popular, and people thought far too much of him. So he had needed to be sidelined, or better yet, killed. He had gone over a number of options, and while he knew that an assassination may work, he had quickly found an even better way, the prince himself giving it to him. Rhaegar wished a council called to gain the Lord's support and bring them onto his side as he removed his father. All Jon needed was for him to approach people, to have his father find out, and then Aerys would do the work for them. Killing the prince would shatter the realm. Alliances would crumble, and their alliance would emerge the largest and strongest. People would unite behind his vision, and the crown would be in their hands. Instead of the West, Dorne, the Crown Lands, and the Reach against them, it would be fractured, more people wishing to see Aerys brought down than supporting him. Aerys' attendants put an end to that, and Jon was left scrambling for a different plan, only for Rhaegar to hand it to him on a silver platter. Robert was furious. Rickard would be too. Hoster and he could play up their own support, and those who would stand against them would seem to be in the wrong. While not yet complete, it was almost everything. He just needed a spark, something to push the realm over the edge, and he had time to see that come to pass. He was eating that night when he was called away from the feast. Robert had not attended, and Jon, while not wishing to deal with him having no real choice, he found him sitting and crying in his tent, the man acting an even bigger child than he usually did. Rolling his eyes, he sat beside him on the table and waited until his ward told him what was wrong. "She hates me," Robert said, and Jon hid his sigh. "No, she doesn't," he said. "She does. She loves someone else, told me she'd not be mine, that she'd not marry me even if she did not wish to be someone else's wife." Robert said through strangled breaths. "She wishes you to fight for her, Robert, to prove your love. That is all." "How can I?" "Jon, I've shown her who I am. She's not like the others. She doesn't seem to like what they like, or she's playing hard to get," Jon said, and Robert looked at him. "Some women love the chase. Robert, just as you yourself do. Do you really think she doesn't want you?" I. Of course she wants you. Look at yourself. Robert, have you ever had a maiden turn you down?" "No," Robert said determinedly. "Then why would Lyanna be any different? Wolves need to be tamed, Robert. It takes a man to do so. Are you a man?" "I am." "Good. Then act like one," he said and stood up, patting Robert on the back. "Thank you, Jon," Robert said, wiping his eyes. A boy, a petulant, spoiled boy, and this was who he wished to crown. As he walked back to his tent and lay down on his own bedroll, he reached into his tunic and took out the 7-pointed star. Reading through it, he knew that this was his real reason, his true path, even if along the way he had to suffer people like Robert Baratheon and Lyanna Stark to get there. River Run, 281-2282, AC Hoster. Seeing the procession as it reached his keep, he looked to see where his daughter was. Finding the carriage very quickly, he smiled when his future good son helped her from the carriage and looked at the rest of the party. There were far fewer Northmen than he expected, and he was surprised that Brandon was the only Stark who had come, having at least expected the rest of his family to join him. Still, he was glad to see the lad again and to see Cat smile so as they walked towards him, his brother and son walking with them. "Lord Tully," Brandon said, and Hoster noticed a strange look on the boy's face but felt it was tiredness and so let it be for now. "Lord Brandon, it's good to see you, though I had expected your family to be with you." "Forgive me, my lord, my brother accompanied them back to Winterfell so I could come alone," he said, and Hoster nodded, though wondered why he wished to come alone. "Cat, you look radiant, my love. "Did you enjoy the tourney?" he said, kissing his daughter's cheek. "I did, father," she said with a smile which he could tell was true. "Come, let's get you all inside. I'm sure you're tired and wish a warm bath and meal," he said, and saw his brother nod. While Edmure and Kat saw to Brandon and his men's room, he walked with his brother to his solar, eager to find out all about the tourney and his future good son. He had Utherides bring him the ale, and he and Brynden took their seats, his brother taking a much larger swallow than he did. "So what was it like?" he asked curiously. "Where to start? The Mad King is mad," Brynden said with a chuckle. "Aerys attended?" she asked, surprised. "He did, God's Hoster. You should see him. Long hair, long nails, scabs on his arms," Brynden said, shaking his head. "The Scab King indeed." "Aye. What else?" "Oh, Tywin Lannister has resigned as Hand, his son named to the Kingsguard." "He resigned in Harrenhal?" he asked. "No, I think he had already done so. They gave Sir Jaime his cloak there, though," Brynden said. "Anything else, brother?" he asked curiously. "I saved the best or worst for last. Rhaegar won the joust. Guess who he crowned?" Brynden said, his features schooled. "His wife," he said, and Brynden shook his head. "His mother?" he asked, though he would have been surprised that Rhaella would attend, and again Brynden shook his head. "Lyanna Stark," Brynden said, and this time it was Hoster's turn to shake his head. "For true?" "Aye, brother, for true." When Brynden left, he sat back and couldn't believe it. Cursing that he'd not gone to see for himself, he wondered how Jon Arryn had reacted. Reaching for a piece of paper, he thought about sending a raven, and then thought the better of it. They held a large dinner that night, not quite a feast, but close enough, and he was happy to see Brandon and Kat speak so friendly to each other. His one doubt on the match had been that his daughter would find the Northmen not to be to her liking, her southern sensibilities repulsed by northern attitudes. Looking at how she looked at Brandon Stark, though it was clear his charm and good looks had won her over, and Hoster was most pleased by that. While marriage was primarily about raising one's standing, he was not averse to his daughter being happy with her future husband also. Looking around the room, he could see that Lysa too seemed happy for her sister, his youngest smiling happily as she spoke to Peter and her uncle. If it wasn't for the odd looks he kept getting from Brandon Stark, he'd have really enjoyed the night. The news Brynden had given him and his daughter's smiles making him feel most content. But something about the way the wild wolf looked to him disconcerted him, and he found out just what it was the very next day. "You cannot," he shouted as Brandon Stark stood up. "I can, and I will." Brandon shouted back, "Your father and I have agreed to this betrothal, and you will marry my daughter." "I will not. I love another, and she's who I'll marry, not my father, and certainly not you will tell me otherwise. I'll see you stripped of your inheritance. You'll get nothing if you don't live up to this agreement." "I care not. I came here to speak to you as a man, to tell you to your face. I've done so, and if you'll excuse me, I'll go speak to Catelyn." "I forbid you. Go. Go back to your precious North Brandon Stark. See what your father thinks of a man who breaks his word. But I'll not have you speak to my daughter on this." "So be it," Brandon said, storming from the room. He was furious. The letter had been sent, and it was up to Rickard to fix this. He'd not be made a laughingstock, though, and not have his daughter treated this way. Brandon Stark would marry his cat, or by the gods, he'd burn the fucking North to the ground. 2 moons later, he smiled as he read the letter from Rickard. He had known that his threats would not fall on deaf ears. Not only were they risking his wrath, but he knew how much Rickard wished this union also. As he reread the letter, he smiled and reached over to take a sip from his glass of wine. "Lord Hoster, I have spoken to my son and made it clear that he must live up to his responsibilities, that he must do what an heir must do and accept the match made for him. Brandon is well aware of what will happen should he not, and upon his return from White Harbor, I feel it best if we make the wedding date official. To that end, Brandon will travel to River Run in 4 moons. Time to officially announce his intent to marry your daughter, the wedding to take place. A further 3 moons from then, I look forward to seeing you in person as we watch our houses be joined. Lord Rickard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North. Hoster made his way down to Kat's rooms, finding her, Lysa, and Peter laughing and japing over something or other. He called for her to join him, and they walked to the sept. Once inside, he asked the septa and septon for a moment, Kat smiling at Mordain as she left. "Do you wish the septa to accompany you when you go north, Kat?" he asked. "Could she, father? I'd be most pleased. I'll speak to the septon. I have some news for you about your wedding," he said, and saw her place her hands together and sit up straight. "Lord Brandon will be arriving in a few moons for the announcement of your wedding date." "When will the wedding be, father?" she asked excitedly. 3 moons from when we announce it, my love," he said and kissed her cheek. "Will there be a feast, father, for the announcement?" Kat asked eagerly. "Of course there will, sweetling, a large one," he said, and saw her smile. "Thank you, father, for the match, for all you've done for me," she said softly. "I only wish you happy, Kat, you most of all," he said, and she threw her arms around him. 4 moons later. No one did this to him. No one. He'd see him in the ground. Him and his whole damn family. Of all the things he'd imagined, this was not one of them. How could he think he'd get away with it? Think that he'd just lay down and accept it? That he had almost killed Peter Baelish was the only bright spot in the whole visit. His hurried departure, looking to be in response to that, and not to him, telling him to leave his lands. Looking over the letter from Jon Arryn, though, at least gave him something to think about, a way to make things right. Though he'd need Rickard's help to do so, and he proved to be incapable of getting one son to do his damn duty. Why should he believe the other would be any better? He felt his head ready to explode. Such was his anger at the events. The sheer fucking audacity of the boy. "What do you mean you're married?" Oster asked. "I mean I'm married. I cannot marry your daughter, I will not. Something I told you already," Brandon said. "But your father?" he said angrily. "You really think going around me was going to work? That I'm that fucking dumb that I didn't expect it? I told you I'd not marry her, and now I can't. When did you marry?" "How? A moon ago, in front of my gods. A fucking tree," he said angrily. "My God, speak to my father, tell him what I've done. I care not. Neither of you has power over me. Neither of you tells me what to do. Get fucking out. Go, don't come back," he said, and Brandon nodded as he walked from the room. No, it wouldn't stand. If he had to pay all the damn gold he had at his disposal, he'd see Brandon Stark in the dirt, he'd have his marriage, and Kat would have her husband, even if it wasn't the one either of them had expected. But Brandon Stark was not long for this world. That oathbreaker had a date with the stranger. Outside Harrenhal Dorne, 28-28-3 AC. AC, Rhaegar. They rode hard and fast, and he prayed she'd be there, that her letter was true, and she'd managed to sneak away. Arthur and Oswell rode beside him, and they too weren't slowing down, Arthur looking around to make sure they weren't being followed. When he saw the horse alone by the water's edge, he began to worry, and then he saw her, and his heart began to beat once again. You came for me. You came for me," she said happily as she kissed his face. "Of course I did, I promised, didn't I?" he said, and this time their lips found each other. "I worried you would not, that your letters, that your feelings may have changed?" she asked, and he laughed as he looked at her, confusing her for a moment. "They have not? I have not. I love you," he said, kissing her again. The road passed Harrenhal, and camped by the God's Eye, Rhaegar eager to show her the letter to prove the truth in his words. He watched her as she read it, and saw the smile on her face when she saw the signatures. "Marry me?" he asked, and she looked to him, the letter still in her hand, as she nodded. "Aye, why not?" she said before breaking into laughter. "Of course I'll marry you," she said a moment later when she calmed down. "There is Sept nearby," he said, and saw her frown, and for a moment wasn't sure the reason why. Looking to her, he smiled when he realized what it was. The Isle of Faces. We can go there too. Marry in front of your gods as well as mine own. He said, and she smiled back at him. It took them 3 days to have both weddings. The Septon signing the papers only when he saw the letter from the High Septon annulling his marriage. Arthur and Oswell had happily signed, his friend remarking on how happy he was. The boat to the Isle of Faces had appeared as if by magic, and he and Lyanna had gone alone to Arthur's dismay. He had felt the power of the place, and saw how much it had meant to Lyanna to marry there, and once he had said his vows, he had moved to head back. Lyanna, though, had other ideas, and as she took him in his arms, he felt more nervous than ever before. Despite Lyanna being the maid, it was him who was clumsy and awkward, and yet once they began, it was far different than he had ever known it could be. Time seemed to stretch on, the nights seeming to last forever. I feel different, Lyanna said as she lay in his arms. As do I, my love, he said, and they dressed. Arthur looked at him strangely when they returned, and it was only the next day he found out why. You were gone but moments, Arthur said when Lyanna was washing the next day. It felt like hours, Arthur. That place, it's different, he said. And Arthur looked at him and said nothing. They rode over hills and through long abandoned trails, keeping away from towns and villages other than to grab supplies. Something told him they needed to go south, and so they rode, and at night they'd stop and camp. He and Lyanna would make love, or he'd sing for her, and over time he forgot he was a prince. With her, he was simply Rhaegar, and she was Lyanna, his wife, his love, his heart. By the time they got to the tower, it was clear she was with child, and so he sent Oswell to the nearest town, and was happy when he returned with the woman. Willa, her name was, and she and Lyanna soon became friends, the older woman reminding her of her mother. Their days became a routine, and as she got bigger, he found himself more sure that what Rainey said was true. Their son would come soon, and he would be what he had once thought he was. The prince that was promised. The song of ice and fire, he said softly, thinking she was asleep. My love, she asked. Sorry, I didn't know you were awake. What did you call him? He told her all of it, and was shocked when she didn't doubt him once. Ilya had thought him mad, strange, and it had taken her time to even consider he was right. Lyanna, though, just accepted it, and he found he loved her even more because of it. It was blissful, idyllic, the happiest time of his life. He'd lived more in the 4 moons he had with her than he had in the 24 years before her. Gerald's arrival put that to an end, and they listened on in shock as he told them what had happened, each part of it worse than the one before. Laying in bed with her that night, they tried to think what had gone wrong. They had sent letters, ravens, yet it seemed they'd not arrived or had been ignored. Now, even though both of them knew what must be done, neither of them wished to speak of it. Jaehaerys, he said, smiling as he rubbed her stomach. Our son, she set her hand beside his. With your eyes. Your hair, she said, and he shook his head. I prefer yours, he said. And she smiled. The prince that was promised to us, my love, our son, she said, and he kissed her. When she slept, he began to write out the letters, the notices of birth, one for Jaehaerys and one for Visenya. He knew he was having a son, a boy, a prince, and yet there was a reason why he needed to have them both, and he knew not what it was. He thought of putting a letter for his son just in case, a note to tell him how he felt, and found he could not. Instead, he put the letters inside the chest and placed them beside the egg and the sword, his son's birthright, and he closed his eyes and knelt down to pray. He argued with Oswell while Arthur just accepted, and then he lay beside his wife as she slept, his own eyes unable to close as he looked to her. Leaving her was the hardest thing to do, and as he rode away the next day, he swore he heard a voice calling him, telling him to stay, to not go, though he knew he had no choice. The Trident, 283 AC. Robert Baratheon. His scouts had been right. The dragon spawn was here, and he looked forward to facing him, to seeing him fall. They had the momentum, the advantage, and once he dealt with him, he'd deal with the others too. Jon was right. They had to die, and so they needed to get there before they could escape. Rhaegar, though. Rhaegar was first, and he'd see him dead on the morrow. He bent the girl over the table and took her from behind, her dark hair and his drunken state making him believe it was her right up until he spent. As soon as she turned around, thought his illusion was shattered, and he was glad he'd taken her this way and not the other. Once she left, he sat down on the bed and reached for the chest, taking it out and looking at it once again. Robert, I write this to you hoping you'll understand, that you'll move on and find happiness with someone who loves you for who you are and someone you can love too. My heart belongs to someone else, Robert, and by now I think you know who that is. It wasn't planned, wasn't meant to slight you in any way, it just happened. We have married, Robert, Rhaegar and I. Married and happy, and I wish the same for you. Forget about me and live your life. Be who you are, and not who others expect you to be. That is all I've ever wished for myself. To be Lyanna, and not Lyanna Stark. And now, more than anything, I'm happy and content to be someone I never thought I'd be. Goodbye, Robert. Lyanna Targaryen. Robert? He heard Ned call out and quickly placed the letter back in its chest. Ned, in here, he shouted back once he put it back under the bed. Robert, the battle tomorrow. We need to take him alive, Ned said, and he nodded. If we can, Ned, then we will do. For Lyanna, Ned said, and Robert looked at him. For Lyanna, he said, and saw his friend smile. His armor glistened in the sunlight, the rubies sparkling as he moved, and yet Robert could only see the smiling face of Lyanna as he moved towards him. Could only see her laughing at him, them both laughing at him, around him in the room. They all laughed, Ares, Rhaella, Elia, all of them. Dragon spawn. He shouted as he moved forward and swung his hammer. Robert, prepare to die, dragon spawn, he shouted loudly. King's Landing 29-7. AC. Jaehaerys Targaryen. He closed his eyes and the glass candles went out, picking them up. He carried them to the chest and placed them inside. Walking from the room, he nodded to Arthur and Walder to follow, and with Ghost beside him headed to the stables. They quickly had Winter, Star, and Rivers saddled, and all three of them mounted and rode from the manse. They moved slowly through the streets, and he resisted the urge to look at the Red Keep each time it came into view. Reaching the gates, it cost him 2 silver stags to be allowed to leave, and once outside he let Winter free, Ghost racing beside him as they left the others behind. He saw the Kingswood in the distance, and soon they were riding through it. Stopping when they were a decent distance inside, dismounting, he led Winter to the small stream to allow her to drink, and then waited for Walder and Arthur to catch them up as Ghost went about his work. Jon, Arthur said as he arrived and quickly jumped off Star, and Jay just shook his head and began to pace. Kneeling down, he closed his eyes and went looking for the door, Ghost ready for him as he always. As one, they moved even more quickly, Jay guiding him as well as Ghost's instincts taking them where he needed to go. Soon he saw it, and they moved as quickly as they could, the white wolf running so fast that it never stood a chance, its antlers soon becoming ineffective as the wolf tore into its neck. He reveled in the kill, enjoying the taste as much as Ghost did, and when the wolf came back covered in blood, Jay could taste it in his mouth. Standing up, he looked to Walder and pointed back where Ghost had come from. There's a white stag just back that way. Ghost will take you to him. Tie him to the horses and we'll drag him to the gates, he said, and Walder nodded as he followed after Ghost. Jon, Arthur asked worriedly. For over 10 years he's been trying to get that stag, trying to make it a trophy. Well, he's not getting it. I'm taking it from him, and that won't be the last thing I take from him before I'm done. Jay said as he climbed up on Winter.